On some nights, the world feels almost too quiet, as if it has drawn a slow breath and is holding it. Streets empty themselves of footsteps and voices. Curtains fall still. The last shop signs go dark one by one, like candles being gently pinched out between invisible fingers. Above it all, a soft haze softens the stars, and the sky looks like a ceiling painted in distant lights. In a small town near the coast, windows glow with the kind of warmth that only exists at the edge of sleep. A kettle cools on the stove. Someone checks a door lock, more out of habit than fear. A dog circles at the foot of a bed and settles with a sigh. Outside, the sea rests against the shore in slow, even breaths, dragging lines of foam up and down the sand as if erasing the day's footprints. Far inland, in a valley surrounded by mountains, the air carries the scent of pine and cooling stone. A single car winds along a narrow road, its headlights tracing pale ribbons over rock faces and guardrails. When it finally disappears, the darkness closes behind it, as gently as water over a stone. On the slopes above, snow lies untroubled, catching a silver glow from the moon, and tiny rivers under the ice whisper to no one. In cities, high up in towers of glass and concrete, office windows go black while bedroom lights quietly bloom. Someone plugs in a phone, not knowing that distant power lines tremble with more than just electricity. Elevators rest between floors like creatures that have finally fallen asleep. Far below their foundations, steel piles and concrete footings sink into soil that seems solid, certain, dependable. Almost everywhere, people make the last small movements that signal the end of a day. A chair is pushed back into place. A bookmark is slipped between printed pages. A child is pulled gently back up onto a pillow. Somewhere, a late train clatters across a bridge, scattering echoes into the night, then fades until it is only a memory of sound. Behind it, the rails cool, returning to silence with the rest of the landscape. It is in these ordinary moments that the world's deadliest days so often begin. There is no drumbeat of foreshadowing, no chorus of warning that everyone can hear at once. Far beneath the houses and highways, slabs of rock grind past each other at the speed fingernails grow. Deep under the ocean's tired surface, pressure folds and coils like a sleeping animal adjusting its weight. Above quiet roofs, invisible rivers of air twist and shear in the dark, drafting the first delicate outlines of storms. No one lying in bed feels the slow bend of a fault line or the distant shift of a tectonic plate. No one turning off a lamp hears the slight reordering of clouds thousands of kilometers away. The planet has its own clocks, its own private calendar of tension and release, written in heat and gravity and depth. To us, the coming hours are just the night. To the Earth, they might be the moment something finally lets go. For now, though, the quiet holds. The sea continues its patient breathing against the shore. The mountains look frozen in their watch. Roads empty, cities dim, villages go still. The world appears peaceful, resting, content to cradle those who sleep upon it. Yet somewhere beneath that illusion of safety, the first, almost imperceptible step has already been taken toward a morning that people will remember for the rest of their lives. We have always tried to explain the moments when the world turned against us. Long before anyone spoke of pressure systems or tectonic plates, people looked at ruined fields, broken temples, and flooded coasts, and searched the sky for a face to blame. When the river rose higher than any memory, it was not water that frightened them most. It was the thought that someone, or something, had chosen this night, this village, these people. In the glow of firelight, stories formed around the sound of wind, and the movement of waves. A sudden storm was not just weather. It was a mood, a message. Thunder became a voice raised in anger. The earth shaking beneath bare feet could only mean that a sleeping spirit deep below had turned in its bed. In the absence of instruments, people treated the world itself as a living being. Far inland, where mountains lifted their dark shoulders against the sky, people told of fires trapped inside stone. Volcanoes were not geological features. They were mouths and wounds that sometimes opened when the world could no longer contain its anger. Smoke on the horizon might be read like handwriting, an omen of battles, famines, the end of a king's line. Offerings were carried up narrow paths and laid on warm rock, not because anyone understood magma, but because they understood the language of apology. Flood myths appeared again and again, in places separated by oceans and centuries. Whole worlds washed clean, whole generations reduced to a single survivor, clinging to a piece of driftwood or a mountain peak. These stories carried sorrow and warning in equal measure. They suggested that the world might one day decide it had seen enough, that it might sweep its surface and start again. For people living at the mercy of rivers and monsoons, such tales were less fantasy than half-remembered history. What is strange is how often the old stories match the geography. Legends of sunken kingdoms cluster around coasts where tsunamis are now known to have struck. Tales of fire gods align with volcanic belts that encircle the planet. Villages that spoke of cursed valleys and forbidden hills sometimes sat directly over fault lines that modern maps now trace in careful color. Without measurements or models, people were still drawing connections between place and danger, stitching rough patterns where we now draw neat lines. In their myths, disasters rarely arrived without reason. There was always a forgotten ritual, a broken vow, a moment of arrogance when people stepped too far into places they had been warned to respect. The world did not simply change, it responded. This way of thinking softened the chaos, offering a painful kind of comfort. If suffering had a cause, then perhaps it could also have a remedy. If a god could be angered, a god might also be appeased. Over time, as calendars lengthened, these stories settled like sediment at the bottom. They appeared in songs, in carved stones, in whispered cautions, not to build too close to the shore or cut too many trees from the mountain's flank. Even as new beliefs rose and old ones faded, the warning remained, wrapped in different names and symbols, but pointing to the same uneasy truth. The places we love most are often balanced on the edge of danger. Now, when we look back with satellites and seismographs, we now see more clearly the forces the ancients could only imagine. Yet their explanations still cling to the landscapes they tried to describe. A quiet bay, a green hillside, a wide river plain can feel different once you know the stories people told about them. Beneath every modern term we use for storms and quakes, there lingers the older idea that the world is not indifferent to us, that it remembers our presence, and that sometimes, for reasons we do not fully understand, it answers. Beneath the grass, beneath the streets and quiet houses, the earth is full of half-finished stories. At first, they don't look like stories at all. A shard of pottery where no village stands, a line of darker soil running like a bruise through a pale hillside, a curve of stone that doesn't quite look natural, rising from the dirt at an odd angle. To a hurried eye, they are nothing but rubble and dust. But the planet remembers differently. It keeps a careful record of every violent moment, pressed into ash, mud, and rock, waiting for someone patient enough to listen. Imagine walking toward a city that no longer exists, one swallowed in a single day by a sky turned black. Long ago, ash fell like snow, soft at first, then heavier, filling streets, muffling footsteps, turning midday into dusk. Now, centuries later, the streets are corridors of compacted dust, the echo long gone, but the shapes still there. Walls that once held paintings and laughter have collapsed into low outlines, tracing the exact size of rooms where people once slept, argued, and dreamed. A doorway stands alone, its frame still intact, opening not into a house, but into silence. It feels less like ruin and more like a photograph of life that someone tried to rub away with a thumb. Beneath that ash, the details of ordinary moments remain, carefully sealed. Tables are still set for meals that were never finished. Clay lamps lie where they fell, their wicks frozen in their last curl of smoke. Amphorae are stacked in neat rows, their mouths stopped as though still guarding oil, or grain, or wine that no one returned to claim. And everywhere, there are footprints, small ones, large ones, some deep and frantic, others hesitating at corners. You can see where a heel dug in hard, where someone turned sharply, where two sets of tracks suddenly merge. The people are gone, their voices dissolved into time, but their last movements are preserved with unnerving tenderness, as if the earth itself reached out and held them in place. In other places, water did the burying. Along rivers that changed their minds, whole villages vanished, not with fire from above, but with mud rising from below. A season of strange, stubborn rain, a storm far upstream, a fallen tree that wedged itself at the wrong bend. Any one of these small shifts could turn a calm river into a slow, unstoppable wall. Houses leaned and folded into the flood, roofs torn away, doors opening into brown, rushing water. Furniture and tools and woven baskets tumbled together, turning and turning, before settling into new positions on a riverbed that no one would ever walk across again. When the waters finally pulled back, they left behind a different land, flat and deceptively gentle. Grass grew over it, birds nested, children in later generations ran across those same fields with no idea of what lay beneath their feet. But dig even a little, and the surface begins to speak. There are fragments of bone, pale and fragile, resting among pebbles and roots. There are bits of fired clay from cooking pots, edges worn smooth, but still curved to fit a long-vanished hand. A comb carved from bone, a bead from a necklace, a toy carved for a child whose laughter is gone. Layer by layer, the river arranged these things like lines in a book, each thin band of silt, a sentence in a language we are slowly relearning. Far from rivers and coasts, there are other graveyards of disaster that do not look like graveyards at all. On a bright afternoon, a hillside might seem perfectly ordinary. Sheep moving like scraps of cloud, grass rippling in the wind, until the light slants low and the ground begins to reveal its secrets. Ridges and shallow depressions appear, forming faint rectangles, circles, and lines. From above, with the wide, indifferent eye of a satellite, these marks sharpen into maps. Ghost streets crossing ghost squares, the footprints of walls long since collapsed. Entire towns survive this way, as geometry alone, the memory of human presence reduced to shapes, pressed gently into the skin of the earth. Even the smallest witnesses keep their own records. At the bottom of quiet lakes, thin layers of mud settle year after year, like pages in a book. Most carry the same soft, predictable colors, but every so often, there is a strange, dark band, a sudden arrival of ash from a distant eruption, blown on winds that outlived the people who watched that sky. In another layer, the kinds of pollen change abruptly, as if a forest burned or fields were abruptly drowned and replaced. In the trunk of a tree that survived, one ring grows narrow and tight, the mark of a year when light felt weaker and the air carried more ash than rain. None of these things shout. They whisper patiently over centuries. When you step back and look at all these traces together, ash-packed streets, bones in river mud, ghost maps under fields, dark bands in lake beds, tight rings in wood, a pattern begins to form. It is not a neat pattern, not one that yields simple answers, but it is a story all the same. A story of ordinary days that ended suddenly, of homes folded into the ground, of voices that stopped in the middle of sentences. Many disasters left almost nothing behind, their memory carried only in stories told by firelight, until even those faded. But others are still here, written into the planet itself. The ground we walk on is not just something that holds us up. It is a vast, layered memory. And in that memory, the earth is already telling the story of nights when everything changed, long before we have learned how to read it. Beneath the forests and oceans and quiet neighborhoods where people drift toward sleep, the earth keeps a memory far older than language. It is not a memory made of images or stories, but of layers, pressed one over another like pages in a book no human hand ever wrote. Ice forms its chapters, stone forms its margins. Even the wind, brushing grains of sand into new shapes, leaves behind a faint line in this endless archive. And though the planet never speaks, the record remains, stretching back through ages when nothing walked on land, through eras of fire and shadow we can only imagine in fragments. High in the polar regions, where the nights last for months and the cold deepens until it feels almost alive, ice serves as a patient historian. Snow falls, soft and weightless, and compresses into layers that seal tiny bubbles of air, each one a perfect silent snapshot of the atmosphere that existed when that flake touched the ground. A million such moments pressed together, becoming a solid column of memory. Scientists drill into this frozen library and lift out cores that glow faintly in the cold light, revealing thin bands that mark volcanic winters, sudden droughts, or skies once dimmed by distant eruptions. What we call disaster becomes, in the Earth's keeping, no more than a thin, dark line, quiet, precise, unjudging. Deep in the ocean, where light has never been, and the darkness is so thick, it feels like a substance rather than the absence of one. Sediments settle in slow, steady drifts. Shell fragments, dust blown from continents, ash from eruptions halfway around the world. All of it gathers in layers so delicate, they resemble the pages of an ancient manuscript. Each band marks a season, a century, a catastrophe. When the seafloor trembles and tsunamis sweep across islands, the ocean does not forget. It simply turns the memory into another layer, tucked beneath the weight of centuries, waiting. Even mountains remember. They rise and fall over spans too vast for human comprehension, but within their uplifted strata lie the remnants of earlier ages. Coral reefs stranded miles above sea level, traces of ancient forests buried under metamorphic rock, and seams of volcanic material marking nights when fire tore through the crust. Every fold, every fault line, every tilted bed of stone speaks of forces that shattered landscapes long before any witness could speak of them. The planet carries these scars without sentiment, without sorrow, simply as part of the truth of itself. There is something humbling in this vast, impersonal memory. Human lives are brief, and even our oldest stories, barely scratch the surface of the time the Earth has lived through. Yet the disasters that shaped civilizations, the earthquakes that sent temples tumbling, the eruptions that darkened skies, the storms that erased coastlines, are all preserved somewhere beneath our feet. We search these records not because they change the past, but because they offer glimpses of patterns, hints of what may come again. Still, for all our tools and measurements, prediction remains elusive. The Earth does not reveal its intentions. It only reveals its history, layer by patient layer. And so we stand on this archive, listening for signs, hoping that in the planet's ancient memory, we might find some small guidance about the future it has yet to unfold. Long before sunrise touches the roofs of sleeping towns, the ground beneath them lies in its own kind of night. It is a darkness made not of shadows, but of depth. Layers of stone pressed together over millions of years, shifting with a patience so vast, it almost feels like stillness. People walk across this surface without a second thought. They build homes, plant gardens, and raise their children over terrain that appears solid, dependable, unchanging. Yet buried invisibly beneath their quiet routines are fractures, thin, wandering lines where the earth once split and continues to drift, almost imperceptibly, in opposite directions. These cracks are not neat or symmetrical. They weave and twist like scars healed poorly, reminders of ancient collisions when continents ground against each other with unimaginable force. Some faults run straight for hundreds of miles. Others fork into branches so thin they resemble the veins of a leaf. Many lie deep below the surface, hidden beneath farmland and asphalt, beneath forests and riverbeds that show no hint of what rests beneath. And yet, every so often, these silent lines breathe, shifting by a fraction of an inch, nudging the world above them without ever announcing their presence. Imagine a small cradle by a window, a child sleeping peacefully while the house creaks with the soft expansion of cooling wood. Nothing feels uncertain in that moment. The floorboards hold, the walls stand steady. The night air drifts through the curtains in a slow, tender rhythm. But beneath the foundation of that home, beneath the sidewalks and fences and trimmed hedges, vast plates of the earth are locked together in a ceaseless tug-of-war. They move so slowly that a human lifetime barely registers the motion. A century might pass before they shift enough to be felt, but the pressure builds all the same, patiently gathering strength. Over time, the edges of these plates catch on each other, refusing to slide smoothly. They grind, resist, and cling, storing the tension that will one day release without warning. Some faults have done this since before the first mammals existed, cracking and healing, slipping and locking, shaping the land in ways no map can fully capture. Others lie quiet for thousands of years, so dormant that people forget they are faults at all. Cities rise over them, highways cross them, entire civilizations grow across their length, unaware that what feels like the safest ground may simply be the ground with the longest memory. There is something haunting in the contrast between the life lived above and the life unfolding below. On the surface, soft footsteps in kitchens, doors closing gently, the hum of refrigerators, the warmth of evening lamps. Beneath it, slow grinding, patient drifting, stone edges pressing against one another with the weight of continents behind them. It is like living in a house built over the chest of a sleeping giant, the heartbeat too deep to hear, the breath too slow to measure. Yet people continue with their days, trusting the illusion of permanence because they must. The earth feels solid because it lets us believe so. But the cracks beneath our cradles remain, waiting, adjusting, holding histories of movement far older than any story we tell. And in that unseen architecture lies the quiet root of every earthquake the world has ever known. Morning began like any other, quiet, pale, almost tender in the way it touched the rooftops and narrow streets. People stepped out of their homes, thinking about errands, conversations, and the gentle rhythm of their day. Birds called from telephone wires. The sun climbed steadily. Nothing about the air suggested that beneath the surface, the earth had begun to loosen the grip it had kept for decades. Nothing hinted that the ground was preparing to behave like something it had never been before. There is a moment before an earthquake that many describe not as a sound, but as a feeling, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that brushes the edge of awareness. Sometimes it is the sudden silence of animals. Sometimes it is the brief, uncanny stillness of wind. But on this day, the first hint came as a low, distant murmur, so faint that most people later wondered if they had imagined it. It was the sound of rock unlocking from rock, of tension finally snapping free after years of quiet strain. Then, without warning, the ground rippled. Not violently at first, but with a strange fluidity, as though the earth had momentarily forgotten its solidity. Streets undulated like waves frozen in asphalt. Fences leaned one way, then the other. Windows rattled in their frames. People stumbled, not because the shaking was strong, but because it was unfamiliar. An alien motion for something they trusted to be still. Children cried out in confusion. Dogs bolted. Doors slammed open as residents rushed outside, searching for explanations in the sky, in the distant horizon, anywhere but beneath their own feet. But the earth continued to move. The murmur deepened into a growl, and the rippling hardened into sharp, decisive jolts. Pavement cracked open in thin, jagged lines. Dust drifted down from rooftops like pale smoke. Some people dropped to their knees, trying to steady themselves on ground that no longer felt like ground. It is impossible to fully describe the moment when a familiar landscape shifts into something unrecognizable. Houses that had stood for generations leaned like softened clay. Walls seemed to sigh before slipping apart. A water tank tipped and spilled its contents, the liquid skimming across the trembling earth as though trying to escape. Poles swayed in arcs that defied their geometry. Even the mountains on the horizon appeared to tremble, though that was only the illusion of a world in sudden motion. Then came the moment when the shaking peaked, when structures groaned in unison, and the earth seemed to rise and fall like the surface of a restless sea. People would later describe it as if they were trying to stand on the back of a living creature. The ground buckled with such force that parked cars hopped in place. Sidewalks split into uneven steps. The soil in some areas lost its cohesion entirely, turning into a slurry that swallowed fence posts and softened the foundations of homes. This liquefaction made solid earth behave like water, pulling, sinking, reshaping the familiar into something new and terrifying. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the motion faltered, the tremors weakened, the growl faded, the ground settled back into stillness, though it no longer looked like the ground people had known when they woke that morning. A haze of dust rose over the streets. Sirens had not yet begun. Birds had not yet returned. The silence that followed felt larger than the quake itself, a deep, echoing quiet that suggested the planet had exhaled after holding tension for far too long. In the hours that followed, as people walked through streets thick with dust and disbelief, a question lingered unspoken in the air. How could something so solid turn liquid beneath their feet? Why did the earth choose this moment, this place, these lives to rearrange? There is no single answer. Some quakes strike with modest magnitude but devastating timing, when soil is saturated, when structures are vulnerable, when people are unprepared. Others strike far from cities, leaving little more than a ripple recorded on distant instruments. The mystery lies not in the force itself, but in the delicate balance of conditions that decide whether the earth moves quietly or leaves behind a day that will be remembered for generations. Animals have always lived closer to the world's hidden frequencies than we do. Their senses stretch into ranges we cannot perceive, picking up tremors, vibrations, and shifts too subtle for human nerves. Long before seismographs were built, before fault lines were named, it was animals who heard the first warnings, small signals rising through the soil and the air like whispers meant only for them. In the days leading to a major quake, patterns begin to weave quietly through the animal kingdom. Dogs who usually greet the morning with wagging enthusiasm suddenly refuse to leave their beds, ears pinned back, bodies trembling with unease. Cats slip beneath furniture and refuse to emerge. Birds lift off in abrupt, disordered flocks, abandoning trees they had nested in for seasons. To the casual observer, these behaviors seem like coincidence, but when viewed together, they form a picture of something stirring beneath the surface. Farmers have long spoken of cattle growing restless before the ground shakes. Herds shift in uneasy clusters, hooves scraping at soil as if searching for the source of a discomfort too deep to understand. Horses snort and pace, tossing their heads toward the distant horizon. Chickens refuse to sleep, shuffling in their coops through the night. Even insects join the chorus, ants pouring from their nests, moving in lines that seem chaotic and purposeful all at once. One evening in a village nestled along a fault line, people later recalled how stray dogs had gathered in the main square, circling and whining at shadows. The animals kept glancing toward the dark outline of the hills, ears twitching with some unheard signal. Hours before the quake, they vanished as if pulled by an invisible thread, scattering into alleys and fields in a frantic, determined flight. To those who noticed, the behavior seemed strange, but not alarming. It was only afterward, when walls had fallen and the square lay cracked open, that the memory of those restless dogs returned with a different weight. Scientists have attempted to explain these behaviors for decades. Some propose that animals sense the tiny vibrations, microtremors, that ripple through the ground in the hours before a major slip. Others believe they detect shifts in underground water or subtle changes in the Earth's magnetic field. Some theories point to air ions or even gases released through fissures shortly before a quake. Yet none of these explanations fully capture the breadth of what has been observed. At times, animals seem to react long before any measurable anomaly occurs. At other times they remain calm until moments before the shaking begins. In forests, wild creatures respond with a fluid coordination that borders on eerie. Deer raise their heads in unison, ears rotating to catch a vibration far below. Birds abandon their branches in waves of beating wings, filling the sky with fluttering silhouettes. In one documented account, snakes emerged from their burrows in the middle of winter, when they should have been hibernating, slithering over frozen ground moments before a devastating quake struck. It was as if something deep inside the earth had called them upward. The most mysterious accounts come from the ocean. Fishermen across generations have spoken of unusual movements at sea. Fish swimming frantically near the surface, dolphins changing their routes, turtles rising at odd hours, as if seeking safety. Some describe entire shoals, vanishing from familiar waters, days before a major offshore quake or tsunami. These animals live in constant conversation with vibrations and pressure changes, and their reactions reveal an awareness that seems almost prophetic. We do not know whether these behaviors are warnings or simply instinctive responses to shifts we cannot measure. There is no clear pattern, no consistent timeline, no universally reliable sign. But the stories persist, scattered across cultures and centuries. Monks from ancient temples wrote of birds whose songs changed pitch before the ground trembled. Shepherds kept notes of sheep that bolted from peaceful meadows without clear reason. In one mountain village, elders recalled the silence of frogs, their nightly chorus stopping abruptly, just hours before an earthquake shattered the valley. Humans once watched these signs closely. In some places, a restless night for farm animals was enough to prompt families to sleep outdoors. Dogs howling in strange rhythm sent neighbors into whispered debate about what the earth might be planning. But as modern instruments grew more advanced, people stopped listening to the older messengers, preferring graphs and sensors to instinct and observation. Still, even today, when a quake begins and the world suddenly shakes in a violent rush, many people report hearing a chorus of dogs barking moments beforehand, or seeing birds explode from treetops seconds before the first jolt. These fleeting reactions remind us that animals are tuned to a channel we no longer hear, one where the earth speaks softly, if only through the faintest shift of stone. Perhaps animals do not predict earthquakes. Perhaps they simply perceive the world more intimately, more honestly, more completely than humans allow themselves to. They live nearer to the earth's breath, closer to the murmurs rising from its hidden depths. Whether coincidence or intuition, instinct or science still unknown, they remain the quiet sentinels of a planet that whispers its intentions long before it acts. For as long as people have watched the ground rise and fall beneath them, they have dreamed of knowing when the next tremor will come. There is something uniquely unsettling about an earthquake's silence beforehand, its refusal to announce itself. Storms gather clouds, floods darken the sky, volcanoes breathe smoke, but an earthquake keeps its secrets buried deep, revealing nothing until it is already unfolding. This mystery has drawn scientists, mystics, inventors, and storytellers into centuries of searching for patterns that might break the code of the Earth's hidden timing. In the earliest attempts, people looked to the sky for answers. They traced the positions of planets, believing the heavens might influence the trembling ground. Others tracked unusual animal behavior, hoping nature's unease held clues human senses had lost. Over time, these early ideas gave way to instruments, delicate pendulums, brass cylinders wrapped in inked paper, later digital sensors tapping out steady lines of quiet data. Each tool brought us closer to understanding the mechanics of a quake, yet none were able to offer what people longed for most: certainty. Scientists mapped fault lines, measured tectonic drift, and charted the historical patterns of past quakes. They found cycles, tendencies, clusters, enough to speak in probabilities, but never in promises. Every advance seemed to reveal more complexity beneath the surface. Some faults slipped silently for years, releasing tension without a quake. Others held their energy for centuries, then unleashed it all in a single minute. The very ground beneath our feet proved more intricate than any theory could contain. Even today, with satellites watching the Earth's slightest movements and sensors listening for the faintest hint of strain, prediction remains elusive. The Earth does not follow schedules that match human expectations. Tectonic plates move over spans of time that make our generations feel like flickering candles in a long night. What seems overdue to us may be perfectly punctual in geological terms. What appears calm may be moments from rupture. And yet, the dream persists. It persists in the quiet rooms where scientists spend night after night reading data that shifts by fractions. It persists in communities built along dangerous faults, where families hope for even seconds of warning. It persists in the human desire to feel less fragile under a sky that is endlessly vast, on a planet that shifts beneath us with no malice and no mercy. Perhaps one day we will see the subtle signs before they align, read the whispers in the earth's deep muscles, and understand what once felt unknowable. Or perhaps prediction will remain a dream, a reminder that some forces cannot be tamed, only respected. For now, the earth keeps its rhythm, steady and secret, and we continue listening, hoping that someday the pattern will reveal itself. Volcanoes have always lived at the edge of our awareness, rising like enormous silhouettes on the horizon, silent, immovable, and patient. From a distance they look peaceful, almost protective, their slopes softened by forests, their peaks brushed with snow. Villages cluster at their feet, cities grow along their shadows, and fields bloom in the rich soil left behind by eruptions long forgotten. To those who live nearby, the mountain becomes a constant companion, a landmark by day and a dark guardian by night. Yet beneath that stillness lies a restless heart. Generations come and go without ever seeing the mountain awaken. Children climb its lower trails, families picnic at its lakes, travelers photograph its ridges glowing beneath the sunset. Life unfolds with the quiet conviction that a mountain sleeping for centuries will sleep for centuries more. And so people build their homes close, drawn by fertile land and clear springs, weaving their daily rhythms into the spaces carved by ancient fire. But a volcano's sleep is not like ours. It does not drift into dreams or stir at dawn. Its slumber is geologic, measured not in hours or years, but in centuries and ages. Beneath its surface, magma moves through chambers and fissures in slow, secret circulation. Gases accumulate, pressure breathes in and out with the Earth's own pulse. Even when the mountain appears still, its molten bloodstream circulates far below, warming rock that has not seen light since before civilization was born. People once believed volcanoes were gods or gateways to the underworld. They imagined spirits living in the fire, guardians or tyrants watching from within the mountain's core. When the slopes trembled, when strange smoke escaped the summit, villagers carried offerings up the winding paths, hoping to soothe whatever force lived beneath the stone. In their stories, the mountain did not simply erupt, it spoke. Those ancient interpretations, though wrapped in myth, captured an emotional truth. A volcano's awakening feels intentional, almost personal. It begins subtly, an unusual warmth in the ground, a trembling too gentle to notice, a thin ribbon of steam rising where the air once lay cold. Birds avoid certain ridges. Springs taste faintly of minerals not tasted before. Nights grow strangely quiet, as if the mountain is listening. Then come the more obvious signs. Small earthquakes begin to pulse through the region, like the mountain clearing its throat. Pools bubble without reason. Animals shift their grazing patterns. Hikers report the scent of sulfur clinging to the wind. None of these things, on their own, signal certainty. Together, they weave a warning. But the world above rarely perceives the stirrings below with clarity. Life continues. Markets open, children play, lamps glow in windows along the foothills. It is difficult, almost impossible, to believe that something so vast and silent could be preparing to change the fate of an entire region. And then, in a single night, or a single hour, the slumber ends. Some awakenings begin with a roar that echoes through valleys like distant thunder. Others begin with silence, broken only by a sudden expansion of light as fire breaches the summit. Ash bursts upward, forming a towering column that blots out stars. From the crater, molten rock spills like the opening of an ancient wound, glowing against the darkness. To those who witness it, the transformation feels surreal. The mountain that stood unchanged for lifetimes now moves with terrifying purpose. What once looked eternal reveals itself as fragile. What once seemed protective reveals itself as powerful. The sleeping giant, so peacefully etched against the sky, reminds everyone that its calm was never guaranteed. Yet even in eruption, a volcano remains a paradox. Its destruction gives way to renewal. Ash enriches the soil. New land emerges. Forests return thicker than before. Life adapts in the space fire leaves behind. And so people return, rebuilding homes, planting crops, living once again beneath the mountain's wide shadow. They know the risk. They accept the rhythm. They choose the land shaped by fire, because its soil remembers what the world was, long before their footsteps ever touched it. Deep beneath the mountain's calm and shadowed slopes, the earth keeps a secret reservoir of fire. It moves in slow, molten currents, glowing in colors no sunrise can match, flowing through chambers carved by pressure and time. This magma does not rush or churn. It slides with a patience older than continents, warming the stone around it until even the deepest darkness carries the faint memory of heat. People walking the surface feel none of this. Their footsteps are light taps on the roof of a world that is alive below, breathing with a rhythm too slow for human hearts to sense. Imagine drifting downward into these hidden chambers, moving past layers of ancient rock, each one older than anything we can name. Eventually, the stone gives way to vast spaces where molten rock gathers like a lake of living light. It is not a lake in the way we know lakes. There is no water, no breeze, no reflection. Instead, the surface coils and folds like fabric, touched by a soft wind, glowing in deep reds, molten golds, and shadows so dark they seem to swallow sound. The air trembles here, carrying the faint hum of minerals shifting from solid to liquid and back again. These chambers are the beating heart of a volcano, silent most of the time, but forever stirring. Pressure rises as gases collect, dissolving into the molten rock until the mixture becomes restless. Then, with a subtlety that would be invisible to any observer, the balance begins to shift. A hairline fracture opens somewhere above. A pocket of gas expands. A small surge of magma pushes upward, nudging the stone like a sleeping creature rolling over in its bed. These changes may unfold over decades or hours. Time here flows differently. On the surface, these deep movements express themselves in whispers. A spring warms. A thin curtain of steam drifts from a crack that once held only cool air. The scent of sulfur appears on the wind, faint but insistent. Birds wheel away from vents they once approached without fear. Trees near the summit tilt ever so slightly, their roots disturbed by the slow swelling beneath. Yet to most people living around the mountain, these shifts blend into the background of daily life. The mountain has always smoked, always warmed the earth in patches, always exhaled strange perfumes from time to time. But deep, inside, pressure builds. The molten lake grows more restless. Bubbles rise through the glowing fluid, bursting with soft flashes that illuminate the chamber walls. Each burst releases gas that travels upward, searching for escape through networks of ancient fractures. When these pathways narrow or tighten, the pressure pushes harder. The magma swells, heating the rocks above until they crack, with a sound too deep for surface ears to detect. Sometimes these signs reach the surface in ways that cannot be ignored. A tremor rattles window panes in nearby villages. Animals flee down the slopes. Streams dry up or reroute overnight. The air grows thick with the scent of minerals stirred from the mountain's breath. Scientists place instruments along the ridges, watching measurements climb, tracking the mountain's heartbeat in numbers that flicker across their screens. They know what these shifts can mean. Yet even with data and charts and decades of study, the exact moment of awakening remains out of reach, because the lake of fire beneath the crust keeps its own counsel. It waits until a final crack opens, until the pressure inside overcomes the weight of stone above. And when that moment arrives, it happens with a force that reshapes the world. The molten rock surges upward, racing through vents and tubes carved over centuries. It rushes like blood through a vein, driven by heat and pressure and the relentless geometry of the earth. When it breaks free at last, it does so in a violent bloom. Lava spilling from the summit, ash rising in towering columns, fire painting the sky with colors no sunset could dare imitate. Yet even as destruction unfolds, there is something strangely serene about the cycle. The mountain is not angry. It is not cruel. It is simply fulfilling a rhythm older than memory, a dance of pressure and release, creation and renewal. When the eruption ends, the molten chambers empty, quieting again into slow, glowing pools. New landscapes form, cooled from fire. New soil gathers, rich with minerals. Life returns in time, growing in green waves across slopes once scorched beneath falling ash. And beneath the renewed forests and rebuilt villages, the lake of fire continues its slow circulation, unchanged and unhurried, waiting for the next moment when the earth decides to speak again. There are places in the world where time did not simply pass. It stopped. Entire cities lie beneath blankets of ash, so thick and so fine that they captured the smallest details of life in the very moment it was interrupted. These places do not feel like ruins. They feel like paused scenes, held in the breathless stillness between one heartbeat and the next. To walk through them is to walk through memory itself, preserved not by intention, but by catastrophe. Imagine approaching such a city in early morning light, the sun climbing just high enough to brush the edges of petrified walls. The ash lies like pale snow, soft in appearance yet dense enough to support your steps. Streets stretch ahead in perfect stillness, their stones buried under the weight of centuries. Doorways stand open, frozen mid-swing. Bowls remain on tables. Tools rest beside half-finished tasks. Everything appears as if the people who lived here simply stepped away for a moment and never returned. Inside some homes, the impressions of furniture linger like ghosts. A bed frame reduced to its outline, a chair embedded in powder gray. In kitchens, clay jars sit sealed with lids that once guarded grain and olives. A cup lies on its side, its curve perfectly printed in the ash, as though waiting for a hand that will never lift it again. In markets, stalls still hold the shapes of baskets, fruits, and hanging cloths, all reduced to hollow molds, faint echoes of color, erased by heat. Even the expressions of those last moments are sometimes preserved, not in bodies, but in the spaces they occupied. A kneeling posture, a hand reaching toward a doorway, the delicate outline of fingers clutching a shawl. These impressions are not gruesome. They are heartbreakingly human. The final gestures of people caught in a moment they did not understand. The ash held their stories gently, without judgment, sealing them away from the erosion of time. As you wander deeper, the silence becomes almost physical. No birds call, no leaves rustle. The city sleeps in a stillness that feels both protective and mournful, like a lullaby for a world that disappeared in fire and falling ash. The air is heavy with the memory of heat, though centuries have cooled the stone. When the wind shifts, fine grains drift across the path, whispering against the ruins like faint breaths. In temples and meeting halls, inscriptions remain on walls that escaped collapse, telling stories of festivals, trade, and prayers once carried into the sky. These messages, carved with such care, now seem like the city's final testimony, an insistence that life once thrived here, full of laughter, conflict, celebration, and ordinary concerns. Nothing in these inscriptions hints at fear. The eruption came too suddenly for that. The surrounding landscape, once lush and vibrant, transformed into barren plains after the disaster. Forests vanished, rivers shifted, and fields turned to hardened ash. But over time, life crept back in small, persistent ways. Mosses clung to crumbled stones, grass pushed through cracks, trees planted roots in soil enriched by minerals from the eruption. Nature healed the wound slowly, leaving the ancient city preserved like an artifact resting beneath new growth. And yet the strangest part remains. These cities feel familiar. Perhaps it is because their final moments are captured with such delicate clarity. Perhaps it is because we can still see ourselves in the outlines left behind, in the bowls on tables, the tools beside unfinished chores, the footprints leading from room to room. The disaster that destroyed them speaks across centuries, not as a monstrous event, but as a reminder of how fragile and precious daily life can be. The ash did more than bury a city. It immortalized it. It turned a moment of terror into a museum of memory, a place where time can be touched and traced with fingertips. Every preserved object, every gently held imprint, is a quiet whisper from the past, a reminder that life goes on until it doesn't, and that even in destruction, there can be a strange, haunting beauty. There are volcanoes, and then there are the giants hidden beneath the surface, vast chambers of molten rock so immense that ordinary eruptions seem like sparks beside a bonfire. These are the supervolcanoes, sleeping beneath plains, forests, and lakes, their boundaries so wide they cannot be recognized as mountains at all. They do not rise sharply against the sky. They do not smoke or rumble in familiar ways. Instead, they rest like enormous quiet basins, their true forms concealed under soil and water, waiting with a patience deeper than time itself. To stand above one is to feel nothing unusual. Meadows ripple with wind. Rivers move through valleys that seem carved by nothing more than age and rain. Birds nest in trees. Tourists take photographs. The ground underfoot appears steady, ordinary, harmless. Yet miles below, heat gathers in pockets as large as cities, swirling in ancient chambers under crushing pressure. The earth holds these reservoirs close, as though cradling a secret it hopes never to reveal. Supervolcanoes rarely give themselves away. Their surfaces swell by inches over years, too slowly for the human eye to see. The land warms in faint, inconsistent patches. Geysers and hot springs bubble and hiss, unaware of the scale of the world beneath them. Scientists set instruments across these regions, watching as the terrain subtly rises and sinks, like the surface of a sleeping creature breathing in its long, slow rhythm. Even with modern technology, the shape remains too vast to grasp without stepping back and seeing the land as a whole. When these giants stir, the consequences ripple far beyond their borders. Past eruptions of this magnitude have blanketed continents in ash, darkened skies around the globe, and cooled the climate for years. They have altered ecosystems, redirected rivers, and left imprints in ice cores and sediments that scientists still read like warnings from the ancient Earth. These events were not mere eruptions. They were planetary shifts, moments when the world's balance trembled. And yet, despite their scale and mystery, supervolcanoes spend most of their existence in silence. They build their pressure grain by grain, molecule by molecule, over thousands of years. They do not announce their intentions. Their chambers swell slowly, breathing in heat and gas, while the world above goes on with its daily life. Children running across fields, roads stretching over plains, buildings rising unknowingly atop ancient scars. Life continues, unaware of the Titan slumbering below. The thought of such power lying hidden can feel overwhelming, but there is another way to see it. The Earth has held these giants for millions of years. It has endured their awakenings and their long sleeps. The ecosystems above have grown, flourished, adapted, and returned again and again. Even after the largest eruptions in history, life found a way to reclaim the land, pushing green shoots through fields of ash, rebuilding forests where devastation once ruled. Supervolcanoes remind us of our planet's vastness, of forces far beyond our control or comprehension. But they also remind us of resilience, of the quiet truth that even in the shadow of unimaginable power, the world continues, evolving in the spaces fire leaves behind. And above these hidden chambers, life carries on as always, unaware of the breathing giant below, trusting the land because it must. At night, when the world begins to dim and soften, the ocean becomes something different from the restless blue expanse seen by daylight. It lies stretched beneath the moon like a sheet of silver glass, rippling only where the wind whispers across its surface. Waves rise and fall with slow, measured breaths, as though the sea itself is settling into slumber. People who live near the coast often leave their windows open just to hear this rhythm, letting its gentleness carry them into sleep. There is a comfort in the repetition, a reassurance in the familiarity of the tide moving in and out, like the steady pulse of a living world. Ships far offshore rock quietly, lanterns swaying with the calm of deep water. Fishermen lie awake in narrow bunks, listening to the faint creak of wooden hulls and the distant splash of small fish breaking the surface. Along the beaches, the wet sand glistens under the reflected glow of stars, each grain holding the memory of countless tides that have shaped it over ages. Even the animals of the coast shift into a slower rhythm. Crabs pause in their scuttling. Seabirds tuck their heads beneath their wings. The entire shoreline seems to breathe out, letting go of the day's noise. Yet beneath this peaceful veil lies an unseen weight, a vast body of water pressing down on the seafloor with immeasurable force. Each drop of water contributes to a pressure so immense that in the deepest trenches it could crush metal. The ocean holds mysteries within its depths, mountains taller than anything on land, valleys darker than moonless nights, creatures shaped by absolute pressure and eternal night. But none of these truths disrupt the illusion of calm at the surface. To the eyes of those standing on the beach, the ocean appears gentle, timeless, trustworthy. There is a strange paradox in this. The sea is both cradle and destroyer, both giver of life and taker of worlds. It nourishes civilizations, carries travelers across continents, and provides its bounty to those willing to brave its waters. Yet it is also capable of rising up with a fury that defies belief, transforming from soft waves into walls of unstoppable force. And the eerie part is that these transformations often begin with silence, with a calm more perfect than any seen before. Deep underwater, tectonic plates shift with slow determination. A fault releases tension built over decades. A mountain of rock collapses inside the ocean itself. These movements, though vast, do not disturb the surface immediately. The initial surge of displaced water travels outward in ripples too gentle to notice. Ripples that stretch wider and wider until they become something else entirely. But none of this can be seen from the shore when night is calm and stars reflect flawlessly across the water. This contrast between the serenity above and the unimaginable forces below creates a quiet unease. People standing on the beach have no way to sense what the ocean hides. They see only the surface, a velvet darkness lit by moonlight, a gentle tide brushing their feet, a lullaby of waves folding into sand. And yet, the ocean remembers every storm it has swallowed, every ship it has taken, every coastline it has redrawn. Its quiet is profound, but not simple. It is a quiet built on depth, on pressure, on the slow accumulation of energies beyond human comprehension. Still, the night sea remains beautiful. It calms the mind. It invites reflection. It lulls children to sleep in seaside towns and cradles travelers on distant waters. Even knowing that the ocean can stand up in a single moment and reshape the world, people continue to fall in love with its midnight stillness. They trust it because they must. They listen to its slow breathing and let themselves drift into dreams, unaware that beneath its tranquil surface, the ocean is always thinking, always shifting, always preparing the next chapter of its endless story. Far out in the open ocean, where no land breaks the horizon and the world feels suspended between sky and water, a tsunami begins its journey almost imperceptibly. Unlike the towering walls of water shown in illustrations or imagined in fear, a tsunami in deep water is merely a subtle rise, a gentle swelling of the sea's surface, sometimes no more than a few feet. A ship passing overhead would not even notice. A sleeping sailor would not wake. The ocean hides its warning well. Deep below, something has disturbed the water. The sudden uplift of the seafloor, a collapse of an underwater mountain, a violent displacement of rock after centuries of pressure. Whatever the cause, the water responds instantly. It gathers momentum, not at the surface, but through its entire depth, from the topmost ripples to the dark abyss far below. Unlike ordinary waves, which touch only the upper layers, a tsunami moves with the full weight of the ocean behind it, a massive pulse of energy traveling outward in all directions. It moves silently. It moves quickly. At speeds faster than a jet airliner, the wave races across the deep, carrying no foam, no roar, no sign of its presence to the sky above. Satellites may detect it. Instruments anchored to the seafloor may sense the slight change in pressure. But to any human eye, the ocean appears unchanged, a flawless sheet of blue stretching endlessly toward the curve of the earth. Night falls on the water. The moon rises. Stars reflect on its surface. Still the wave moves. It is difficult to fathom the scale of this invisible traveler. A single wave can cross entire oceans, sweeping from one continent to another in a matter of hours. Along the way, it passes over underwater canyons and broad plains, adjusting its shape but never losing its force. Sometimes it encounters deep trenches that momentarily soften its height, only to be amplified again as it approaches shallower coasts. The ocean floor acts like a sculptor, shaping the wave's final form long before it reaches land. In the deep, the wave's energy spreads outward like the rings formed by a pebble dropped in still water. Only these rings may span thousands of miles. The ocean carries the memory of the disturbance with remarkable fidelity. Even when storms churn the surface, even when winds slice across the waves, the tsunami continues below, untouched, unstoppable, maintaining its path with quiet determination. As it approaches land, the transformation begins. The ocean floor rises beneath the wave, forcing the water upward. What was once a barely noticeable swell starts to grow. The energy that was spread through thousands of feet of depth compresses, pushing the surface higher and higher. The wave slows, but the water behind it continues to surge forward, piling into a rising mass. Yet even now, danger remains deceptively hidden. Sometimes the first sign is not a towering wall of water, but the opposite, the sea suddenly pulling back. Shores that had been washed by gentle surf moments before are exposed. Rocks glisten where waves once danced. Fish flap helplessly on wet sand that was underwater minutes earlier. People, unaware of what this means, walk out to gather shells or take photographs. Children run toward the newly revealed seabed, laughing in delight. It is a moment of eerie beauty, wrong in a way that the mind struggles to recognize. Meanwhile, the wave continues its approach. What arrives at the shoreline is not a single wave, but a series of surges, each one taller and stronger than the last. They do not always break like normal waves. Sometimes they simply rise, lifting water inland as though the ocean itself is stepping forward. Streets fill, trees bend, houses, cars, and boats are carried inland in silence punctuated only by the sound of the advancing flood. The sea becomes unrecognizable, transformed into a force that reshapes everything it touches. And all of it began with a quiet ripple in the deep, an invisible traveler crossing oceans with the patience of the planet itself. The most haunting moment before a tsunami is often the one people remember most clearly, the moment the sea retreats. Not with the subtle shift of a changing tide, but with a suddenness that feels almost supernatural. Waves pull away from the shore as if a great breath is being drawn from the ocean's lungs. Water that has covered the beach for centuries slips back, revealing sand untouched by human feet, ridges sculpted by currents, stones polished by time. At first, it seems like a miracle. Children race toward the exposed seafloor, laughing as they collect starfish or chase small fish trapped in shallow pools. Adults walk out in wonder, pointing at coral heads or shells they have never seen. Cameras click. Voices rise with excitement. The world feels strangely expanded, as though the coastline has gifted its secrets to anyone quick enough to accept. But beneath this wonder lies something ancient and ominous. Animals sense it first. Birds lift abruptly from the beach. Dogs run inland, tails tucked, eyes wide. Fish swim frantically in the retreating water, pulled toward deeper currents they cannot reach. Even the wind feels different, a faint, tense silence spreading over the sand. The sea continues to draw back. Boats lean sideways as their hulls settle into mud. Piers that once floated now stand high and dry. A long, flat plain stretches between land and the diminishing water, shimmering beneath the sun like an open invitation. The beauty of it is disorienting. The exposed seabed glitters with trapped pools that reflect the sky like mosaic mirrors. But this beauty is a mask. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the ocean is gathering itself. The water pulled from the shore is not disappearing. It is being drawn upward, stacked into a rising wall of force that has not yet revealed its face. The retreat is the inhale before the scream, the pause before the strike. It is the ocean stepping back, not in surrender, but in preparation. A few people, remembering stories passed down through generations, begin to shout warnings, but their voices are lost in the confusion. Most have never seen such a spectacle and cannot imagine danger hidden within such stillness. The human mind does not easily recognize patterns it has never witnessed. Then comes the sound, a low, distant rumble, not like thunder, but deeper, like the earth itself is shifting beneath the waves. The horizon darkens, the line between sea and sky thickens, and far offshore, the water begins to rise, slow at first, then impossibly fast. The moment of recognition arrives too late. The sea that stepped back now returns with a force that rewrites maps, reshapes memories, and transforms ordinary days into haunting stories. The once exposed seabed disappears beneath churning water. Pools collapse. Sand vanishes. All the wonder of the retreat is erased in an instant, replaced by the unstoppable surge of a world reclaiming its place. Across the world's oceans, a quiet network of watchers lies hidden beneath waves and anchored in remote waters. These machines, buoys, seabed sensors, floating pressure gauges, form a delicate chain of vigilance, listening always for the faintest shift in the sea's pulse. They do not sleep. They do not hesitate. They drift and measure, day and night, capturing whispers from the deep long before any human ear could sense them. Each buoy carries instruments that sink toward the seafloor, tethered by cables that hum with tension in stormy weather. These instruments read subtle changes in water pressure, tiny fluctuations that might indicate a passing tsunami wave hundreds of miles away. When they detect something unusual, they send signals upward, through satellites orbiting high above the Earth, into the hands of scientists who study the ocean's moods. In monitoring stations across the world, glowing screens display lines that rise and fall in precise rhythms. Most of the time, the changes are ordinary: the sway of tides, the passage of ships, the push and pull of wind. But occasionally, a pattern emerges that feels different. A pulse, a signature, a whisper from the deep that suggests something powerful has begun. Scientists do not rely on a single measurement. They look for confirmation, another buoy detecting the same shift, a seismic reading matching the timing, a satellite image showing a faint bulge in the surface of the sea. When these clues align, alerts ripple outward across continents. Sirens sound, texts go out, radios crackle to life. People along distant shores are warned of a wave still hours away. Yet the system is not perfect. Some tsunamis move too quickly, slipping between sensors undetected until they crash upon a coast. Others are triggered by landslides or unusual faults, producing signals too subtle for machines to interpret in time. Even when warnings do come, minutes matter, and in some places, minutes are all the world allows. Still, there is something profoundly human about this quiet watchfulness. People build these systems not to control the ocean, but to listen to it, to understand its moods, to give strangers across the world a chance to reach higher ground before the sea rises. Every buoy, every wire, every satellite is a small act of care stretched across thousands of miles. The dream of perfect warning continues. One day, perhaps, our instruments will read the ocean as clearly as ancient mariners read the sky. But for now, we rely on this fragile web of watchers. tireless guardians floating beneath shifting stars, hoping they will hear the next approaching wave long before it reaches the shore. Night settles over the coastline like a soft curtain, drawn slowly across the horizon. Lamps glow in windows, casting warm halos across porches and quiet streets. Inside, people stretch, settle onto sofas, and listen to the familiar rituals of an ordinary evening. The ticking of a clock, the clatter of dishes, the hush of a television playing in another room. No one notices the first shift in the air outside, so subtle it feels like the ghost of a breeze. It slips between branches, brushes along rooftops, and disappears again, with barely a whisper. But something has begun. Clouds gather far offshore, thickening in places where the warm breath of the sea rises into the darkening sky. They form slowly, as though assembling themselves from memory, layer upon layer of drifting vapor, drawn toward a single unseen center. A storm begins not with drama, but with small, delicate alignments. A patch of warm water, a pocket of cool air, a gentle swirl that, over hours, becomes something more deliberate. In small homes near the coast, curtains flutter as the pressure dips. People glance toward windows without knowing why. Pets grow restless, shifting in their sleep. A faint hum seems to settle over the neighborhood. Not a sound, but a feeling, like the air itself is thinking. The night is still warm, but the warmth carries a strange heaviness, as though the atmosphere is leaning closer to the earth. Far above, clouds spin in wide, slow arcs. What began as scattered wisps becomes an organized shape, a gathering spiral. Lightning flickers deep within the mass, too distant to be seen by those on shore, but enough to illuminate the storm's growing hunger. The ocean responds, sending small waves pulsing outward, their tops hissing with foam. The tide seems uncertain, rising higher than usual before retreating again. People continue their routines, unaware of the choreography unfolding miles above. Someone folds laundry, someone locks a door, someone kisses a child goodnight. These tender gestures feel eternal, but in the world beyond the walls, the storm takes its first real breath. A gust pushes inland, stirring the tops of trees. Leaves tremble. A loose shutter taps softly against a house. Somewhere, a street sign shivers on its post. Then the wind retreats again, as if reconsidering or preparing. Storms do not roar into existence fully formed. They build themselves layer by careful layer, drawing strength from the warmth of the ocean and the openness of the sky. The first breath of a storm is almost always gentle, like a polite warning. It is the moment before the tension begins to tighten, before the air grows sharp and electric. As midnight deepens, clouds thicken overhead. The stars fade behind milky veils. People fall asleep without knowing that the world beyond their windows has changed. The storm circles, finding its structure, gathering its voice. Its first breath may have been quiet, almost tender, but its next will carry the weight of a name, a path, and a memory that many will not forget. There is something almost supernatural about seeing a hurricane from above. From satellites orbiting far beyond the pull of weather, the storm reveals its true architecture, a vast spiral of clouds stretching hundreds of miles across, turning with patient, relentless motion. At its center lies the eye, a perfect circle of calm, surrounded by walls of violent wind and towering clouds. This calm is not mercy. It is geometry, the still point around which chaos organizes itself. From space, the eye looks like a pupil, dark and focused, staring upward through the atmosphere. It watches silently as the world spins beneath it. Pilots who fly near hurricanes speak of the moment the plane breaks through the outer wall, the sudden shift from turbulence to eerie stillness. 1 second, the aircraft shudders under punishing winds. The next, it glides into an atmosphere so smooth, it feels unreal. Sunlight pours through. Below, the ocean churns. Above, the sky becomes an impossibly clear blue. Inside the eye, the silence is profound. It feels like stepping into a cathedral made of air, the walls stretching upward in colossal, swirling towers of cloud. Lightning sometimes flickers in those walls, illuminating the spirals from within, like veins of light. Rain evaporates before it reaches the ground, creating a thin mist that hangs motionless. It is a place of impossible peace, made all the more haunting by the knowledge that destruction circles it like a crown. On the ground, the storm feels nothing like serenity. Winds slam against buildings, bending trees in great arcs. Streets flood, roofs lift. The outer bands lash communities with rain so heavy it becomes a curtain of moving water. But even there, people speak of moments when the winds suddenly fall silent. Birds emerge, confused. People step outside, bewildered to find a gentle breeze where moments before there was only chaos. This is the eye passing overhead, the storm's watchful center. Children sometimes mistake this calm for the storm's end. Grown-ups call them back inside, urgency sharp in their voices, because they know the truth. The other side of the storm is coming, and it is almost always worse than the first. The human act of naming storms gives them a presence, a personality. But the storm does not know its name. It does not know the cities along its path, the people waiting in darkened homes, the memories of storms that came before. It simply moves, feeding on warm water and favorable winds, strengthening when conditions align, weakening when they do not. The eye is not watching with intent. It is watching because that is what physics demands, a still point held in place by the spinning force around it. Yet it is difficult not to feel something alive in the presence of a hurricane. Its structure is too elegant, its movements too purposeful, its calm center too unsettling. The storm breathes, it grows, it pulses in waves of rain and wind, and at its heart, the eye remains motionless, looking back at the sky with a stillness that feels almost sentient. By the time the storm moves inland and weakens, the eye begins to lose its shape. The structured spiral unravels. Clouds scatter. The pupil fades. What was once a perfect circle becomes a disorderly mass of moisture and wind. But even then, the memory of that calm, that impossible calm, lingers in the minds of those who witnessed it. It is the kind of stillness that stays with people for years, reminding them of the strange and fragile balance between peace and devastation. In many parts of the world, storms are not rare visitors, but familiar seasonal guests. Cities built along warm coastlines grow up knowing the rhythm of approaching hurricanes and typhoons. Glass towers reflect sunlight by day, but when storm season comes, those same towers brace against winds that can turn the most ordinary object into a projectile. People stock their homes with candles, water, and batteries. Shutters are checked, radios tested, flashlights set on countertops like quiet sentinels. There is a ritual to preparation, an almost ceremonial choreography that plays out every year. Sandbags appear at storefronts. Wooden boards cover windows. Boats are pulled ashore and tied like restless animals. Conversations at grocery stores shift from daily gossip to storm tracks and projected paths. Neighbors exchange knowing looks, a mixture of experience, caution, and an unspoken promise to help each other if the need arises. Even children sense the shift in tone. Hearing it, in the lowered voices of parents and the sudden urgency in the air. Meanwhile, the city itself changes. Traffic slows as people rush to secure last-minute supplies. Buses fill with those evacuating low-lying neighborhoods. Bridges hum with cars headed inland. On highways, headlights shine like long strings of beads, weaving away from the coming storm. Yet not everyone leaves. Some stay behind, out of duty, out of stubbornness, out of attachment to the place they call home. They stand on balconies and rooftops, watching the sky darken, feeling the wind grow stronger with each passing hour. When the first outer bands arrive, rain sweeps across the streets in slanted sheets. The city exhales a long, uneasy breath. Traffic lights sway, trees bend and rustle, glass buildings moan faintly as wind presses against them like an enormous hand. The world grows dim even in daylight, as though the storm is pulling the sky closer, lowering the ceiling of the world. Inside these modern structures, people listen to the wind howl through narrow spaces between buildings. A deep, resonant cry that echoes through the streets like a voice trying to speak. The sound rises and falls with the gusts, creating a strange and haunting melody, unique to cities of glass. It is not the natural rustling of leaves or the crack of distant thunder. It is the storm, learning the architecture, feeling its way through alleyways, bending around towers, searching for weaknesses. As the center of the storm approaches, the wind intensifies. Rain becomes punishment, hammering rooftops and sidewalks. Power flickers, then fails. Generators hum, windows rattle. The city that once glowed with millions of lights now lies in shadow, illuminated only by brief flashes of lightning, tracing jagged paths across the sky. Each flash reveals a snapshot of movement, trees thrashing, debris swirling, waves slamming against seawalls. The storm's presence becomes absolute. Yet within this turmoil, people adapt. Families gather in interior rooms, sharing stories or sitting in silence, listening to the wind drum against their walls. Emergency workers move through the streets when they can, guided by faint beams of flashlight. In shelters, strangers comfort strangers, forming fleeting communities built on shared vulnerability. It is in these dark hours that cities reveal their heart, not in the towering structures or bright skylines, but in the resilience and quiet courage of those who endure. When the storm passes, the city stands changed. Streets are strewn with broken branches and shattered glass. Power lines hang low, windows gape open, but the people emerge, as they always do, stepping into the damp, heavy air with a sense of relief that feels like rebirth. They sweep their porches, clear debris, help neighbors, and begin stitching life back together, one small gesture at a time. Cities of glass and wind may bend beneath the weight of storms, but they do not break easily. Their strength lies not just in steel and concrete, but in the human determination to rebuild, to remain, and to claim their home once more from the passing fury of the skies. The storms we face today are not the same storms our ancestors knew. Across the world, the air grows warmer, and the seas follow, absorbing the heat with a quiet inevitability. Warm water is a storm's greatest fuel, and as oceans grow hotter, the atmosphere becomes more capable of holding moisture. This combination creates storms that pull energy from the sea with startling ease, strengthening faster and lasting longer than those of the past. In many regions, meteorologists watch satellite images with increasing concern. A storm that once would have taken days to intensify can now reach dangerous strength in a matter of hours. These rapid intensifications leave little time for preparation, forcing communities to adapt quickly or face greater risk. The science behind this is not mysterious. Warmer oceans provide more heat, more moisture, more instability, the perfect recipe for storms that grow with frightening speed. Yet this reality is felt not in graphs or climate models, but in the lived experience of those who wait for the skies to turn. Farmers notice changes in the rhythm of seasons. Fishermen speak of warmer currents and unusual fish swimming in waters where they do not belong. Families who have weathered storms for generations now speak of winds that sound different, rains that fall heavier, tides that climb higher. In places where storms strike year after year, the emotional weight grows heavier. Rebuilding becomes a cycle rather than a response. Insurance becomes harder to secure. People begin to ask difficult questions. Should they move? Should they rebuild higher? Should they trust the land and sea that have shaped their lives, or acknowledge that the world is shifting beneath their feet? Still, there is resilience in these communities. New building codes rise from old ruins. Evacuation routes become clearer. Homes are built on stilts, roofs reinforced, windows fortified. Technology plays its part, offering earlier warnings and clearer forecasts. There is sorrow in these changes, but there is also hope. The quiet hope that preparation, knowledge, and adaptation can soften the edge of an unpredictable future. For all its fury, a storm remains a natural expression of the planet's shifting balance. But in a warming world, that balance trembles more easily. The storms that form now carry echoes of a climate in transition, shaped by choices made far from the coastlines that will feel their impact. And though the winds may howl louder and the rains fall heavier, people will continue to face them with the same stubborn strength that has carried humanity through centuries of change. The first sign was not dramatic. It was simply the absence of something that should have been there. The soft tap of rain on rooftops, the gentle darkening of soil, the smell of wet earth rising like a blessing from the ground. People looked to the sky and found nothing but an unbroken blue, stretched thin across the horizon like a sheet pulled taut. The season that should have begun with thunder and clouds arrived instead with silence. Fields waited, farmers waited, rivers waited. At first, the delay felt harmless, a quirk of weather that would correct itself in a few days. But days became weeks, and the heat grew heavier. Leaves on the trees curled inward, holding their moisture like secrets. Dust began to rise from footsteps that once fell on soft ground. The sun lingered longer, as though reluctant to set, drawing every trace of water back into the sky. People continued their routines with a growing unease. Wells that had never run dry now produced only a slow trickle. Animals gathered near shrinking puddles, their hooves sinking into cracked mud. Women carried empty pitchers, farther and farther from their homes, walking roads that shimmered with heat like molten glass. Conversations grew quieter as the unspoken truth settled over the land. The rains were not simply late, they were absent. In the early mornings, the sky still held a memory of coolness, a faint breeze slipping through dry branches, but by noon, the heat pressed down like a weight. Birds vanished toward distant places where water still ran. Cattle clustered under the rare patches of shade, ribs showing beneath thinning hides. Even the insects grew fewer, their buzzing replaced by the soft rasp of wind dragging across parched grass. Cracks opened in the earth, long jagged lines that stretched like ancient scars. In places where streams once flowed, children now walked on the dry riverbed, kicking up clouds of dust that drifted like pale smoke. The sound of a stone falling into a dried pond carried eerily far, echoing off empty banks. Life slowed to a crawl as everything living conserved what little moisture remained. Farmers looked at the sky with a mixture of hope and resentment. They watched for clouds, for wind shifts, for any sign of change. Some prayed, others cursed. Most simply waited, their eyes drawn again and again to the horizon. When a single dark cloud finally appeared, one afternoon, people rushed to their doors. They lifted their faces, their hands, their hopes. But the cloud drifted past without releasing a drop. The psychological toll deepened. At night, the air held the heat of the day like a furnace, refusing to cool. Sleep grew restless. Dreams were filled with rivers, wells, storms, visions of water that evaporated upon waking. The land itself seemed to sigh beneath the weight of thirst, groaning softly as roots shrank and leaves browned. As weeks turned to months, the drought reshaped everything. Entire fields failed. Grain withered before it formed. Trees that had survived generations of storms stood brittle and hollow. The once fertile soil turned to powder, slipping through fingers like sand. The drought did not announce itself with destruction or sudden force. It crept in with absence, with silence, with the slow tightening of nature's grip. Villagers gathered in the evenings, voices hushed as they shared stories of past dry years. None as severe as this. Elders spoke of dust storms that swallowed entire horizons, of rivers reduced to memories, of migrations forced by thirst. Now, those stories felt less like history and more like prophecy. The year the rains didn't come was not marked by a single event, but by a long, aching stretch of time in which every living thing felt itself slowly unraveling. It was a disaster without thunder, without wind, without the drama of the sky breaking open. It arrived like a whisper, persistent and merciless, stealing life grain by grain until the land stood quiet, brittle, and waiting for a mercy that would not come soon enough. Rivers do not disappear overnight. Their vanishing begins quietly, almost politely, with a slight lowering of the waterline, a subtle widening of the banks. Fishermen notice it first, the way the water no longer reaches the marks carved into old wooden posts, the way the current weakens, losing its confident pull. Children who once splashed along the shallows now step onto dry stones where water once glimmered. The river gives hints long before it speaks in certainty. At first, people reassure one another. It will return, they say. The rains are late, but they will come. The river, after all, has always been there. It has carried boats, fed fields, carved stories into the landscape with its patient touch. It feels eternal. It feels loyal. But as weeks pass, the changes grow harder to ignore. Sandbars rise like small islands. Pools separate into isolated pockets where fish swim in frantic circles. Herons stand motionless in shrinking pools, waiting for prey that has fewer places to hide. The riverbed begins to show its bones, stones polished smooth by years of rushing water, now exposed beneath the unfiltered sun. The sound of the river softens, becomes hesitant. In the dead heat of afternoon, you might hear nothing at all. Villages along the shore adapt in small ways. Women walk farther to fill their pots. Farmers dig trenches in hope of guiding the dwindling water toward their fields. People gather at dusk, squinting at the fading line of water, searching for signs of recovery. But each day, the river slips back a little more, retreating like a tired creature seeking shelter. Animals follow its slow collapse. Deer come at dawn, drinking greedily from muddy edges. Cattle wade into deeper sections, standing still with desperation in their eyes. Predators linger nearby, sensing weakness. As the pools shrink, life condenses. Fish crowded into smaller spaces. insects buzzing frantically around what little moisture remains. The air grows thick with heat and the smell of drying vegetation. The emotional toll becomes heavier than the physical one. The river is not just water. It is identity. It is memory. It is the reason villages formed where they did, the reason farms grew fertile, the reason children learned to swim in certain currents and climb along certain banks. When the river vanishes, a community loses more than a resource. It loses a piece of its soul. As the months stretch on, the riverbed becomes a long, snaking scar across the landscape. Cracks form in the mud, like strange geometric patterns. Dust storms rise from the exposed floor, carried into nearby towns where they settle in coats on rooftops and window ledges. Wells dug near the river run dry, pulling up only gritty sand. The last stretches of water gather in deep ancient pockets known only to elders, places where the river clung longest to itself. Eventually, even these pockets fade. The final day of flowing water is not dramatic. It leaves quietly, slipping away in the middle of the night while the world sleeps. In the morning, the only evidence is silence. No soft rush, no sparkling surface, no reflection of sunlight dancing in gentle waves. Just emptiness, where a living river once moved through the land with confidence. People walk along the bed, touching the stones still cool from the absence of water. They speak softly, as though mourning a friend. Some stand still for long minutes, staring at the horizon, trying to imagine how life will continue without the river that shaped everything they know. It is only then, in this heavy, dry quiet, that they realize the truth. Rivers do not vanish because they want to. They vanish because the world around them has changed, because rains have failed, because mountains have warmed, because the balance of seasons has shifted in ways too complex to see all at once. And once a river disappears, it takes a long, aching time for the land and the people to remember how to live without it. Famine never arrives as a single moment. It creeps in slowly, like a shadow lengthening at dusk. The first signs appear in the fields, small, quiet changes that farmers notice before anyone else. Crops that once grew tall now falter halfway. Leaves yellow long before harvest. Soil that once smelled rich and alive turns powdery beneath the hand. At first, people blame a bad season, a dry month, an unlucky patch of land. But then the pattern spreads. One household's pantry grows sparse. Another family barters for grain earlier than usual. A mother walks to market and finds fewer baskets of produce lining the stalls. Prices rise. Conversations lower to whispers. The land is still the same land, the sky the same sky, yet something essential has gone missing. Water, nutrients, balance, hope. Day by day, the silence deepens. Fields that should be filled with workers fall empty. Tools lean against fences untouched. The wind blows dust over rows of withered stalks, creating ghosts of movement where life used to thrive. Children who once ran between rows, searching for lost balls or chasing each other, now stand at the edge of the fields, unsure where to play. Their parents call them back quickly, unwilling to let them witness the slow collapse of the land. In kitchens, meals grow smaller, portions shrink. Recipes that once celebrated abundance now stretch simple ingredients across entire families. A pot simmering on the stove no longer carries the rich aroma of spices and vegetables. Instead, it carries the thin, weary scent of sustenance rather than satisfaction. The sound of metal spoons scraping the bottom of pots becomes a familiar echo. Markets change too. Vendors sit behind half-empty tables, their eyes scanning the road for buyers who come less frequently. Coins clink with hesitation. People buy what they must, not what they want. The market chatter softens, replaced by tense glances and quick exchanges. Everyone senses the shifting mood, the discomfort of hunger, settling into the edges of daily life. Hunger changes people slowly. At first, it makes them restless. Then it quiets them. A father who once laughed loudly becomes withdrawn, saving his energy. A child grows irritable, unable to understand why their stomach aches each night. Neighbors who used to share food begin to hold tighter to what little they have. Not out of selfishness, but survival. Stories from older generations return. Tales of past famines, past hardships, villages that endured years when rain forgot them. These stories, once shared as distant history, become warnings. They remind people that famine is not just the absence of food. It is the unraveling of community, the tightening of fear, the quiet transformation of ordinary life into a fragile negotiation with nature. Despite the silence of the fields, famine carries its own sound. The crackle of dry leaves underfoot, the sighs of those who ration what little they have, the low hum of worry in nighttime conversations. It is the sound of a world adjusting to scarcity, of people waiting for relief that may come too late. And yet, even in the heart of famine, small acts of kindness persist. Someone shares a loaf of bread with a neighbor. A grandmother gives her portion to a child. A farmer digs a well deeper, hoping to find water for the village. These gestures do not erase the hunger, but they keep the community's heart beating. Empty fields can take a long time to heal, but silence, even the silence of hunger, is not the end of the story. It is the pause between chapters, waiting for rain, waiting for renewal, waiting for the world to remember how to feed itself again. Some transformations happen suddenly, a storm, a quake, a flood. But desertification is a slow, patient force, reshaping landscapes grain by grain. It begins subtly, almost invisibly. A patch of soil loses its moisture. A hardy shrub withers. Grass that once spread in thick waves now retreats, leaving behind bare earth. At first, these changes look like coincidence, a dry season, a shift in weather. But over years, the pattern deepens. The wind becomes the dominant sculptor. It lifts dust from the ground and carries it in shimmering sheets across the landscape. With each gust, a little more soil is lost. What remains behind is paler, thinner, less alive. Trees that once anchored the ground with deep roots now stand vulnerable, their bark cracking under relentless heat. When they fall, the land loses another barrier against the advancing sands. Villages near these spreading deserts feel the change intimately. A farmer wakes to find his fields coated in a fine layer of sand. A shepherd notices the grass growing shorter along the grazing routes. Wells produce water, tinged with the taste of dryness, a hint of the parched earth above. People watch the horizon and see the line of yellow creeping closer each year, swallowing shrubs, fences, and abandoned structures. The emotional weight of this transformation grows heavier with time. Unlike sudden disasters, desertification offers no single moment to point to, no day when the world changed. Instead, it is a slow erasure, a fading of color and life. Families migrate in search of better land, leaving behind homes half buried in drifting sand. Roads vanish, rivers shrink. The sound of wind replaces the chatter of markets. Yet, desertification does not mean the land is dead, only altered. Patterns of survival emerge. Certain plants adapt, sending roots deeper in search of water. Animals shift their feeding habits. Communities build stone lines or terraces to trap soil, fighting the sands with cleverness and persistence. Some plant trees strategically, creating barriers that slow the desert's advance. These efforts do not always succeed, but each one is a testament to the refusal to surrender. The sight of a once green valley turning to dust is a reminder of the delicate balance that sustains life. It shows how easily a landscape can shift from abundance to scarcity when rain falters, when soil thins, when heat grows relentless. And yet, it also reveals the resilience of those who endure. People who bend but do not break, who adapt in ways both small and profound. Deserts grow slowly, but so does hope. New solutions take root, ancient techniques return, and in the spaces where sand has claimed the earth, life waits for its moment to rise again, patient as the land that shaped it. Night settles gently over the mountains, laying a blue shadow across slopes blanketed in snow. The air is so cold it seems to hold its breath, each flake glittering faintly under the moonlight. Pine trees stand in immobile rows, their branches heavy, their needles crusted with frost. Nothing moves. Even the animals that roam these high places retreat into dens and hollows. It is a landscape suspended in fragile balance, quiet, pristine, and seemingly eternal. But beneath the stillness lies tension. Snow that falls lightly in early winter becomes layered, compacted by wind, reshaped by storms. Each new snowfall adds weight. Each gust of wind carves ridges and cornices, building drifts in odd and precarious shapes. These layers do not always bond with one another. Some rest loosely atop hardened ice, separated by thin films of air or crystals. To the eye, the slope looks solid. To the mountain, it is a delicate tower of cards waiting for the slightest touch. Avalanches often begin with silence, a soft, nearly inaudible shift, a settling of snow, a subtle release of pressure. Sometimes all it takes is the weight of a single hair bounding across the crust. Other times, the vibration of a distant sound, the warmth of a sunbeam, or the faint tremor of a hiker's boot. The mountain listens to every disturbance, storing it deep within its layers. Then, without warning, the balance fails. A crack races across the slope, sharp and sudden, like a snapped bone echoing in a vast chamber. Snow fractures along invisible fault lines, and the top layer begins to slide. At first it moves slowly, almost lazily, but within seconds the mass gains speed. What began as a gentle shift becomes a roaring body of snow, ice, and air, rushing downward with a force that defies imagination. The avalanche consumes everything in its path. Trees vanish in white clouds. Rocks disappear beneath churning powder. The roar grows until it sounds like thunder, trapped in a narrow valley. The wind produced by its descent is strong enough to tear branches from trunks, to knock a person off their feet long before the snow reaches them. It is a river of frozen light, glowing faintly beneath the moon, moving faster than any animal can run. And then, just as suddenly, it stops. The debris settles into drifts that can reach dozens of feet high, soft and smooth on the surface, concealing a chaotic tangle beneath. The silence returns, heavy and absolute. The mountain looks peaceful again, as if nothing has happened. But, buried deep under the snow, lie broken trees, scattered stones, and sometimes heartbreaking traces of those caught unaware. Avalanches do not roar because they are angry. They do not fall because they choose to. They are simply the natural release of pressure, the mountain exhaling after holding tension too long. They remind us that even the quietest landscapes can hold hidden violence, and that beneath the beauty of winter lies a world shaped by forces invisible until the moment they awaken. Winter has a way of settling into the bones of a landscape, creeping into the seams of daily life with cold fingers. But some winters stretch beyond their expected borders, refusing to yield to spring. The stories of these long, lingering winters linger in human memory. Seasons when the sun felt muted, when crops failed to sprout, when uncertainty gnawed at entire civilizations. It begins subtly: a delayed thaw, a late snow, frost clinging to windows deeper into the year than usual. Farmers wait for the first warm breeze, for the ground to soften, for shoots of green to appear. But the earth remains cold, hard as stone. Nights feel longer. Days carry a blue, subdued light. Birds return hesitantly, their songs uncertain. Historically, such winters often follow great volcanic eruptions, mountains releasing clouds of ash so vast they ascend into the stratosphere, forming sun-dimming veils that can drift for months, even years. These invisible shrouds filter sunlight, lowering temperatures across continents. People who lived through such periods recorded strange skies: sunsets stained with deep red and violet, moons ringed with eerie halos, days that never seemed fully bright. In villages, entire rhythms of life shifted. Food stores dwindled as crops failed to sprout. Livestock weakened. Rivers froze further downstream than anyone could remember. Fishermen broke through thicker ice each morning. Farmland turned into pale, brittle fields that crunched underfoot. It felt as though the world itself was holding its breath, suspended in a prolonged moment of hesitation. Yet daily life persisted. Families huddled around small fires, their breath visible in the air. Children played inside homes instead of fields. Elders told stories of winters past, offering comfort and warning. These stories blended myth and memory, tales of years when snow fell in summer, when people wore heavy coats to harvest meager crops, when nights felt endless. The psychological toll was immense. What does it mean when a season refuses its place in the cycle, when the promise of spring becomes uncertain? There is fear in such disruption, a quiet dread that nature has slipped out of its familiar rhythm. People leaned on rituals, prayers, and the fragile hope that warmth would eventually return. And eventually, it always did. The ice melted. The pale sun regained its strength. Grass pushed through the softening soil. Rivers flowed freely again. But those who lived through winters that would not end carried the memory for the rest of their lives. A reminder of how delicately balanced the world is, and how easily that balance can shift when the sky darkens with dust no human hand can control. These winters stand as monuments to the interconnectedness of the planet. How a single eruption, thousands of miles away, can dim the sun across continents, altering seasons, reshaping harvests, and reminding humanity that even the passing of time is not guaranteed. The world turns, but sometimes it hesitates. High in the polar regions, where the world feels suspended between light and darkness, ice stretches endlessly toward the horizon. It forms in layers so ancient that time itself seems frozen within them. The wind that sweeps across these plains carries a hollow sound, as if echoing inside a vast cathedral carved of snow. The cold is absolute, pressing against skin, against breath, against thought. Yet beneath this stillness, the ice holds secrets older than any story humans have ever told. Glaciers move in slow, deliberate strides. They advance and retreat across continents, grinding mountains into dust, shaping valleys, sculpting entire landscapes. But they do more than carve the earth. They record it. Each snowfall traps tiny bubbles of air. Each winter leaves behind a new layer. Over thousands of years, these layers compress into clear blue ice, sealing away fragments of ancient atmospheres, volcanic ash, cosmic dust, and the faint chemical signatures of forgotten eras. To scientists, drilling a core from a glacier is like retrieving a scroll from nature's oldest library. The ice glimmers with faint bands, each marking a year, a season, a moment the world has already forgotten. Some layers contain ash from distant eruptions, thin, dark lines marking nights when the sky once glowed with fire. Others trap pollen that reveals forests long vanished. Occasionally, deeper still, are traces of cosmic events, tiny particles carried from beyond the atmosphere and locked in ice before humans existed to witness their arrival. But the most haunting records are the bubbles, small, shimmering spheres trapped within the ice like tiny ghosts. Inside them is air breathed by creatures long extinct, air untouched by war or industry, or the rise and fall of civilizations. When researchers melt these ancient samples, they release voices from the past, whispers of climates that shaped the course of life itself. It is as close as humanity has ever come to touching time. Yet the ice holds more than environmental memory. In some of the coldest places on Earth, entire organisms lie suspended in frozen sleep. Moss, preserved for centuries, can revive when exposed to sunlight again. Single-celled creatures awaken from deep time, their tiny structures intact. Scientists have found insects frozen mid-movement, as though paused in the midst of flight. Even microbial communities cling to the undersides of glaciers, surviving in darkness and extreme cold, waiting patiently for conditions to change. Ancient animals, too, emerge from melting ice. Mammoths with fur still intact, wolves preserved with visible teeth and claws, birds whose feathers retain faint traces of color. These remains do not look dead in the usual sense. They look interrupted, as if pulled suddenly from one moment into another. Their presence raises unsettling questions. What else lies buried deeper? What histories remain sealed beneath layers no drill has reached? What mysteries will the thawing world reveal? In some myths, ice is described as the boundary between living and dead, a place where souls linger in suspended stillness. It is easy to see how such stories formed. Walking across a glacier can feel like stepping into a world untouched by time. The air is so clear it seems new. The snow so quiet, it feels sacred. Beneath your feet lie thousands of years of memory, storms, seasons, migrations, extinctions, all held in cold embrace. But ice does more than preserve. It conceals. Beneath vast ice sheets lie entire mountain ranges, hidden lakes and valleys unseen by human eyes. Radar scans reveal landscapes that have not felt sunlight for millions of years, their shapes ghostly and surreal. These buried worlds remind us that Earth holds secrets, even in silence, places where life may have once thrived, where unknown stories sleep beneath miles of frozen weight. As the climate warms, the ice retreats, surrendering its records. It reveals its ghosts reluctantly, releasing ancient air into modern skies, exposing creatures that last walked the earth before humans could write, unveiling landscapes that were never meant to be seen in our age. The melting feels both like a gift and a warning, an invitation to learn and a reminder of what is being lost. Ice does not forget. It remembers every snowflake, every shift in the wind, every year of plenty, and every year of cold. And as it melts, those memories spill into the present, carrying whispers from worlds long gone, asking quietly whether we are listening. Across the polar regions, the world is changing in ways both quiet and profound. Ice that once stood firm for centuries now melts in patterns that seem to accelerate each year. Glaciers recede like slow-moving tides, withdrawing from the land. Ice shelves crack with deep, thunderous groans that echo across empty plains. The white armor that once shielded the planet from excess heat grows thinner, patchier, more fragile. Along coastlines of the far north, villagers speak of winters that feel different, shorter, warmer, less predictable. Hunters find old routes unsafe as sea ice forms later and breaks earlier each year. Ancient trails once crossed with certainty now feel treacherous. The stories passed down by elders still speak of deep, reliable cold, of ice thick enough to hold entire herds, of nights so bright with aurora that the sky seemed alive. But the younger generations know a different reality. Thinner ice, shifting patterns, unfamiliar risks. On the glaciers, meltwater carves long blue ribbons across the surface, pooling in bright turquoise lakes. These pools are beautiful, but deceptive. Their weight presses down, opening fractures in the ice below. Water flows into these cracks, widening them, hastening the glacier's march toward collapse. What once melted slowly and predictably now moves with a swiftness that startles even seasoned researchers. In the Arctic Ocean, the summer ice cover shrinks further each decade. Satellites show darker oceans exposed to sunlight where reflective ice once lay. The black water absorbs heat, warming the air above it, creating feedback loops that accelerate the melt. Polyneus, rare openings in the sea ice, appear more frequently, exposing waters that once remained sealed beneath winter's grip. Animals dependent on ice for hunting or resting struggle to adapt, traveling longer distances in search of places that feel familiar. High mountain ranges experience a similar transformation. Glaciers that fed rivers for millennia now shrink, leaving behind barren rock. Communities downstream face uncertain futures as water supplies diminish. Festivals marking the arrival of spring snow melt, grow muted, overshadowed by concern. In some villages, people have watched entire glaciers vanish within a single lifetime. A disappearance previous generations would have thought impossible. And yet, for all its fragility, ice remains a powerful storyteller. As it retreats, it reveals ancient forests hidden beneath its weight, stones shaped by long-vanished rivers, and frozen remains of animals that walked the earth before recorded history. These revelations feel like messages from a world that once was, reminders of how landscapes evolve, how climates shift, how the earth renews and remakes itself. Still, there is grief in watching the shield shrink. Not because ice is inherently permanent, it has always advanced and retreated, but because the pace of the change feels unnatural, hurried, mournful. The melting ice is a quiet alarm, sounding without sound, urging humanity to notice the transformation unfolding at the edges of the world. The shield may be thinning, but its story is far from over. Ice will return in cycles yet to come, adapting to the planet's shifting rhythms. What remains uncertain is how well humanity will adapt alongside it, whether we will listen to the warnings carved in frost before they melt completely into memory. Each night, the sky opens like a vast, dark ocean, its surface shimmering with distant lights. Meteors streak across this expanse in thin silver arcs, burning brightly for the briefest of moments before disappearing into the deep quiet of space. Most are harmless, tiny fragments of cosmic rock, no larger than a grain of sand. They arrive with soft finality, dissolving into trails of light that vanish as quickly as they appear. But not all stones from the stars burn away. Some survive the fall. Long before humans understood the nature of meteors, people looked upward in awe and fear. A streak of fire across the night sky might be read as a message from the gods, an omen of change, a warning. Stories formed around these lights, tales of heavenly battles, fallen angels, and stars descending to earth. The truth, though less mythical, is no less mysterious. These glowing streaks are fragments of ancient worlds, relics from the birth of the solar system, wandering debris that has traveled for millions of years. Most meteors vanish without trace, but now and then, a larger body enters the atmosphere, a meteorite big enough to survive the plunge. When this happens, the air before it compresses violently, heating to temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun. The stone glows white, then gold, then deepens into a burning red. A sonic boom follows, rattling windows and startling animals miles away. For a moment, night becomes day. These rare events have shaped Earth's history in profound ways. Massive impacts have carved craters miles wide, altered climates, and even steered the course of evolution. The most famous of these events, the impact that contributed to the extinction of the dinosaurs, began as a simple rock drifting through space, drawn toward a planet it had never touched before. Its arrival changed everything. Even smaller impacts can leave their mark. A crater hidden beneath a forest, a field of shattered trees, a sudden flash above a quiet town, followed by a shock wave that ripples through the land. People who witness such events often describe a feeling of humility, a reminder that the Earth is part of a much larger, more unpredictable cosmos. Meteorites that reach the ground are cold to the touch, their burning heat lost during their final descent. They often carry patterns etched by fiery entry, thin, delicate lines tracing their surface like silver veins. Some contain minerals older than Earth itself, fragments of asteroids that formed before the planets took shape. To hold one is to hold a piece of the universe's earliest moments. Yet for all their rarity, the night sky remains full of potential. The Earth moves constantly through clouds of cosmic debris, each piece following its own orbit, its own destiny. Most will burn away. A few may reach the ground, and fewer still might be large enough to leave a lasting scar. It is easy to forget how vulnerable the planet is beneath the beauty of the stars. The lights above feel distant and serene, but they are reminders of the restless universe surrounding our world. Each falling stone, each streak of fire, is a whisper from that vastness, a reminder that the boundary between earth and sky is thinner than it seems, and that the cosmos does not forget its wandering fragments. The sky was still dark when the first flash appeared, a sudden unnatural bloom of light that turned night into a fractured imitation of dawn. People who saw it described the moment in different ways: a blinding flare, a burst of white fire, a sphere of brilliance that seemed to hover before dissolving into a rolling wave of sound. Some thought it was lightning, others thought a distant explosion. No one realized, in those first seconds, that they were witnessing a celestial arrival. Such events have happened throughout history, often in remote places where few people see the moment, but many feel the aftermath. The most famous accounts speak of forests flattened in an instant, trees knocked down like matchsticks, wildlife scattered, and skies filled with strange colors, long after the flash faded. These were airbursts, cosmic objects that entered the atmosphere and exploded before reaching the ground, releasing energy equivalent to the mightiest of human weapons. But in the moments before such destruction, there is a strange, deceptive beauty. The rising light is too bright, too sudden, too silent. Shadows sharpen in bizarre directions. Animals freeze, unsure whether to run or hide. The air vibrates with a tension that feels alive. Some describe an ozone scent, sharp and metallic. Others recall a ringing sensation in their ears, as though the world itself were holding its breath. Then comes the sound, a booming shock wave that tears across the land, shattering windows, knocking people off their feet and sending dust spiraling into the sky. Birds erupt from trees, animals flee in blind panic. The ground trembles as the atmosphere absorbs the force. If the airburst occurs high enough, the damage may be limited to a sudden terror, a moment etched into memory. But when it happens low, the results can be devastating. In remote regions of Siberia, vast swaths of forest still bear scars from past airbursts. Trees toppled in perfect radial patterns, pointing away from the center of the explosion, like silent witnesses. The ground beneath may show no crater, because the cosmic visitor disintegrated before touching Earth. But the shockwave it produced was enough to reshape the landscape. Imagining the event from the perspective of the falling object is equally humbling. A meteoroid drifts through space for millions of years, following a trajectory shaped by gravity, collisions, and ancient accidents. Then, by sheer coincidence, it intercepts Earth's thin veil of atmosphere. Friction ignites it, pressure crushes it. The energy stored in its long, lonely journey is released in an instant. People who witness these events from afar describe skies painted in unusual hues, vibrant reds, unearthly greens, shimmering golds, as particles from the explosion scatter sunlight in rare ways. For days afterward, sunsets glow magnificently, hiding the memory of the explosion behind beauty. Humans have always feared sudden brightness in the dark. Our earliest ancestors looked to the heavens for meaning, interpreting flashes and falling stars as messages or warnings. Even now, when science explains much of the phenomenon, the emotional impact remains. There is something deeply unsettling about daylight arriving too fast, a reminder that the universe does not operate on human time, nor does it offer warnings when it chooses to reach down and touch the Earth. Airbursts leave no crater to study, no massive stone to examine. They vanish almost as quickly as they appear. But in their brief brilliance, they remind us of the fragile line between ordinary life and cosmic intrusion. We go about our routines, believing the world beneath our feet is the only one that matters, until the sky opens and reveals that our planet is not alone, not shielded, not separate. It is simply one world among many, moving through a cosmos both beautiful and indifferent. At the edge of the solar system, the sun looks like a distant star, small and faint. But up close, in our sky, in our days, it is a force of unimaginable power. Its light sustains life on Earth, fuels weather, colors the sky, shapes the rhythm of days and nights. Yet the sun does more than shine. It storms. These storms do not look like the ones on Earth. They do not carry rain or wind or lightning in the familiar sense. Instead, the sun releases enormous bursts of charged particles, streams of plasma hurled into space at incredible speeds. When these clouds of energy travel outward, they become solar storms, capable of disturbing magnetic fields, scrambling electronics, and creating auroras that dance across polar skies in ripples of green and violet. Most of the time, Earth's magnetic field protects us. It deflects the solar wind, shaping it into harmless arcs around the planet. But sometimes the sun exhales with unusual force, sending billions of tons of plasma directly toward us. These eruptions, known as coronal mass ejections, can take a day or less to arrive, striking Earth with invisible pressure. When a strong solar storm reaches the planet, the magnetic field shudders. Compasses swing wildly. Satellites flicker. Radio signals weaken or vanish. Power grids strain under sudden currents induced in the ground itself. Pilots flying near the poles report strange interference. Astronauts aboard the space station retreat to shielded areas to escape the surge of radiation. On the ground, most people notice little, unless the storm is truly powerful. The most beautiful signs appear in the sky. Auroras ripple far beyond their usual boundaries, glowing in places where they are rarely seen. Curtains of shifting light stretch across the darkness, shimmering and folding like banners, caught in an invisible wind. These lights carry the memory of the solar storm, each wave a dance of particles colliding with the Earth's upper atmosphere. But beneath the beauty lies risk. In the modern world, where electricity flows endlessly through wires and satellites watch over nearly every corner of life, a truly massive solar storm could cause widespread disruptions. The last event of such magnitude occurred in the 19th century, a storm so powerful that telegraph wires sparked with fire and the night sky glowed bright enough to read by. Today, with our deeper dependence on technology, the same event could be far more disruptive. Yet solar storms also remind us of connection, that despite the vast distance between Earth and Sun, we are linked by invisible threads of energy and magnetism. The Sun breathes, and the planet responds. It sends light that warms our days, and storms that ripple through our skies. To watch an aurora is to witness a cosmic conversation. The Sun speaking in particles, the Earth answering in light. The solar system is vast, but it is not empty. Earth travels through a cosmic landscape filled with drifting rocks, dust clouds, radiation belts, and gravitational currents that tug gently at our orbit. From afar, the planet's path around the Sun seems peaceful, a perfect ellipse traced year after year. But on the scale of millions of miles, Earth is navigating a crowded and unpredictable neighborhood. Asteroids move through the inner solar system like ancient wanderers, remnants from the formation of the planets. Most are small. Some are enormous. A few cross Earth's orbit, passing closer to our world than the Moon. These close approaches are usually harmless, but they remind us of the delicate dance of gravity, how easily a slight shift could redirect a rock toward our world. Comets follow even stranger paths, looping in long, cold arcs from distant reaches of the solar system. When they near the Sun, they grow tails that shimmer across the sky. Beautiful, yes, but also reminders of the icy debris that fills space. Behind each comet is a trail of dust that Earth sometimes passes through, creating meteor showers that dance across the night. Invisible forces shape our cosmic environment as well. The solar wind streams constantly from the Sun, bending magnetic fields, sculpting the shape of Earth's protective shield. Radiation belts encircle the planet, trapping particles that flow through space. Even the gravity of distant planets nudges the paths of asteroids over centuries, creating patterns that astronomers trace like faint threads. Occasionally, the solar system becomes a little more dangerous. Earth moves through regions of higher debris density. Two asteroids collide, sending fragments into new orbits. A comet breaks apart, scattering icy shards that drift for millennia. These changes occur on timescales far beyond human perception, yet their effects ripple forward, shaping the risks future generations may face. From the surface of Earth, it is easy to feel sheltered, surrounded by atmosphere, protected by magnetic fields, grounded by gravity. But zooming out reveals a different truth. Our planet is a small, fragile world, moving through a dynamic and sometimes hazardous environment. The dangers are not constant, but they are real, woven into the history of life on Earth. Still, there is wonder in this precariousness. It connects us to the stars above, reminding us that we are part of a larger story, one shaped by cosmic forces we cannot control, but can observe, measure, and marvel at. In this vast neighborhood of drifting stone and radiant light, Earth continues its steady orbit, carrying us through the darkness with quiet resilience. Humans have always searched for meaning in the unpredictable. We trace shapes in constellations, rhythms in waves, cycles in seasons, hoping that the universe reveals a pattern we can rely on. When disasters strike, earthquakes, storms, fires, floods, the longing for patterns intensifies. Tragedies feel less frightening when they can be explained, less cruel when they follow rules. And so, throughout history, people have tried to read the earth the way they once read the sky, as a book written with recurring signs. It begins with memory. A village elder recalls a great flood that came after a season of strange winds. A story passed through generations marks the time a mountain shook 3 times before erupting. Families remember the year the river froze late, or the time a warm winter became a harsh spring. These memories become the earliest patterns, woven from experience, strengthened by repetition, half fact and half feeling. Eventually, patterns become predictions. People declare that storms come every 7 years, that drought follows 2 failed monsoons, that tremors in early spring foretell larger quakes later in the year. Some of these beliefs are superstition, born from fear, but some rest on real observations, small notes collected over centuries by communities whose survival depended on paying attention. Modern science inherited this instinct, turning pattern-seeking into a discipline. Scientists study sediment layers, tree rings, ice cores, volcanic ash, and ancient shorelines, searching for repeating cycles. They find rhythms in climate shifts, in tectonic movements, in ocean currents. The Earth, messy as it is, carries echoes of its past in the present. Heat waves return in intervals. Storm seasons wax and wane. Certain faults rupture in sequences that span centuries. Yet the deeper one looks, the more elusive the patterns become. A drought cycle breaks. A fault sleeps longer than expected. A storm forms in a region where no storm has formed before. The Earth repeats itself, but never perfectly. And this imperfection is what haunts pattern seekers. They wonder, is the world truly chaotic, or is there an underlying order too complex for human minds? The temptation of patterns is powerful because it promises understanding. If disasters follow rules, then perhaps they can be anticipated, prepared for, softened. A community might build walls before a flood. Engineers might reinforce buildings before a quake. Farmers might store grain before a drought. The idea of a predictable world feels comforting, even when the patterns are incomplete. But patterns can also deceive. Humans are wired to find meaning in coincidence, to connect unrelated events simply because they appear sequential. A strange cloud before an earthquake becomes a superstition. A hot summer becomes an omen. A sudden flood repeats a story from decades ago, convincing people the cycle has returned. And sometimes, the desire for patterns blinds us to the randomness woven through natural systems. Still, we search. We search because we must, because living on a restless planet requires some way of making sense of its movements. The temptation of patterns is not a flaw. It is a survival instinct, a whisper of hope that even chaos has a shape. In the end, whether the Earth moves in rhythms or in wild, unpredictable pulses, the need to understand it remains. We listen to the soil, the sky, the water, believing that somewhere within the noise of nature, a quiet pattern waits to be discovered, one that will help us navigate the uncertain ground beneath our feet. The Earth moves through rhythms older than humanity, cycles of warming and cooling, of rising water and sinking crust, of winds shifting across continents in long, sweeping arcs. These cycles unfold slowly, too slowly for a single lifetime to witness fully, yet their fingerprints mark every landscape. When we call a drought unusual or a storm unprecedented, we are comparing them not to nature's full history, but only to the brief chapter we have lived. Volcanoes, for instance, follow their own strange clocks. Some erupt regularly, breathing fire every few years, like a creature with a predictable heartbeat. Others sleep for centuries, before awakening with a force that astonishes even scientists who study them. Their cycles are guided by the movement of magma, the rise of pressure, the shifting of tectonic plates, processes so slow and vast that they resemble the turning of great cosmic wheels. A volcano may appear dead, but its silence can be a pause in a cycle much larger than human memory. Water follows cycles too, though its patterns are more visible. Rivers swell and shrink, guided by rainfall, snowmelt, and distant storms. Ocean temperatures rise and fall in decades-long oscillations, altering wind patterns, storm tracks, and rainfall across the planet. Entire civilizations have risen during wet cycles, when rivers ran high and fields bloomed, only to fall when the cycle shifted and the rains retreated. In ancient lakebeds and dry river valleys, one can still see the shapes of past abundance. Ghostly shorelines curved against the desert, silent reminders of water's long dance across the earth. Wind carries cycles within it as well. The monsoons of Asia, the trade winds near the equator, the shifting jet streams in the upper atmosphere, all follow patterns shaped by temperature differences and the rotation of the earth. Some years, winds bring relief, others, destruction. Storm seasons expand, contract, intensify, weaken. Even the fiercest hurricanes grow from delicate interactions of warm water, cool air, and invisible currents moving across the sky. When these cycles overlap, fire, water, wind, the results can feel catastrophic. A volcanic eruption darkens the sky, cooling oceans and shifting wind patterns for years. A change in wind alters rainfall, triggering drought in one region and floods in another. Rising ocean temperatures fuel stronger storms that reshape coastlines. What seems like chaos is often the intersection of long, slow rhythms that humanity has barely begun to understand. People living close to nature often sense these rhythms intuitively. Farmers feel the soil respond to subtle seasonal changes. Fishermen notice shifts in currents generations before scientists formally study them. Shepherds observe grazing patterns that reflect broader climate cycles. These lived experiences form a quiet knowledge, not exact, but deeply attuned to the heartbeat of the land. Yet even with satellites, sensors, and centuries of data, predicting these cycles remains challenging. Some follow steady intervals, others drift unpredictably, influenced by factors too complex to model fully. But recognizing the existence of these cycles offers a kind of comfort. It reminds us that the world is not random, that its movements have roots, history, and shape. In the end, the cycles of fire, water, and wind show that the earth is not a static world, but a breathing one, expanding, contracting, shifting through patterns as old as time. We may not always foresee their turns, but by listening closely, we can begin to understand the rhythms beneath the surface, guiding us toward a deeper awareness of the planet we call home. Across the globe, there are places where disaster seems to return again and again, as if drawn by some invisible magnet. These are the hotspots, regions where the Earth's forces converge in restless harmony. They are beautiful places, often rich in culture and history, but beneath their charm lies a tension that never fully fades. One such place is the Pacific Ring of Fire, a sweeping arc of volcanoes and earthquake zones that surrounds the Pacific Ocean. Here, tectonic plates grind, slide, and collide in a continuous dance. Cities along this ring experience frequent tremors, small reminders that the Earth is never fully still. Volcanoes loom across skylines, some steaming quietly, others covered in snow that belies the fire beneath. Life flourishes beside these dangers, because the land is fertile, the seas abundant, the climate mild. In other regions, rivers carve floodplains that become both lifelines and threats. These plains offer rich soil, easy irrigation, and trade routes, perfect conditions for civilization to grow. Yet the same rivers that nourish these lands can swell with destructive force, spilling over their banks, reclaiming towns, fields, and roads. People rebuild because they must, because the river gives more than it takes, because generations have lived within earshot of its currents. Storm alleys, too, shape the world. Warm water fuels cyclones that return year after year to the same coastal regions. Entire cultures adapt to these rhythms, building homes with reinforced walls, practicing evacuation drills, reading the sky with knowledge passed down through centuries. The storms are neither unexpected nor welcome, but they are familiar, part of the environment as much as the mountains and forests. Some places stay quiet for decades, even centuries, only to erupt in sudden violence. A fault line that has not moved in living memory shifts. A dormant volcano awakens. A calm coastline is struck by waves generated thousands of miles away. These events remind people that quiet does not mean safe, and that geological time moves differently from human time. The people who live in these hotspots are not reckless. They simply understand the balance between danger and life. They know that risk is woven into the land, but so is beauty, opportunity, and belonging. Their ancestors built homes here, fished these waters, farmed these soils. Their histories are rooted in the ground that shakes, the mountains that smoke, the rivers that flood. These repeating disasters form a strange kind of relationship between people and place, a bond forged through endurance. Communities rebuild stronger, stories evolve, folklore grows from the memory of past events. Children learn early where to run, what to pack, how to read a change in the wind. These lessons do not breed fear, they breed resilience. The places that refuse to stay quiet often become the places people love the most. They are landscapes shaped by extremes, defined by contrasts, lush valleys beneath volcanic peaks, thriving cities along trembling coastlines, villages perched near landslides carved by ancient storms. Here, life persists, not despite danger, but alongside it. And perhaps that is the lesson these hotspots offer, that the Earth is alive, and living alongside it means accepting both its gifts and its tempers. There are moments before a disaster when the world seems to shift in subtle, uncanny ways. The air feels heavy, animals grow restless, instruments record anomalies too small to interpret, clouds form in unusual shapes. People wake in the middle of the night with a sense that something is wrong, though they cannot explain why. These faint, uncertain signals may mean nothing, or they may be the Earth's quiet warnings. Before some earthquakes, sensors detect tiny pulses of magnetic energy. Before volcanic eruptions, gas compositions shift subtly at vents. Before major storms, atmospheric pressure dips in patterns that defy traditional models. None of these clues are reliable on their own. They flicker in and out, appearing inconsistently, varying from event to event. Yet they create a mosaic of possibilities, hints that the Earth speaks in whispers long before it raises its voice. Animals notice these signals earlier than humans. Birds take flight before tremors. Dogs pace and whine. Fish behave erratically in calm ponds. Scientists have documented these patterns for centuries, though the mechanisms remain uncertain. Perhaps animals sense low-frequency vibrations. Perhaps they detect subtle chemical changes in the air or water. Or perhaps they simply listen more closely than we do. Humans, too, sometimes perceive signals without understanding them. A feeling of pressure in the ears before a storm. A charged electric sensation before lightning. A sudden stillness before a tornado. These perceptions are often dismissed, but they reflect a deeper truth. Our bodies are part of the natural world, shaped by its forces, attuned to its rhythms, in ways we have forgotten. Scientists study these almost signals carefully, hoping to decode patterns that could one day predict disasters with greater accuracy. But the Earth's language is complex. Its warnings are not always clear. Some disasters strike without any precursor. Others produce signs too subtle or too quick to interpret. Still, the search continues, not out of fear, but out of curiosity and hope. Each faint signal, each unexplained reading, each strange behavior offers a thread that might someday lead to understanding. Perhaps future generations will look back and wonder how we missed what seems obvious to them. Perhaps the clues are already here, waiting for patient minds to decipher them. The signals we almost hear remind us that the Earth is not silent. It moves, breathes, and shifts in ways both grand and delicate. And though we may not always perceive its language, we are surrounded by its quiet messages, carried on the wind, the soil, the water, and the sky. Every home, no matter how stable it seems, rests on a world that is constantly shifting. The ground beneath our feet is not the unchanging foundation we imagine it to be, but a thin crust floating atop currents of molten rock. Yet people build their lives on this surface with extraordinary trust, planting gardens, laying bricks, setting tables, raising families. The ordinariness of daily life continues in quiet defiance of the planet's restlessness. In small towns near fault lines, the earth may tremble with gentle murmurs from time to time. Pictures rattle on walls, windows hum briefly. People pause, glance around, then return to what they were doing. They are accustomed to these subtle reminders. The ground is not still, but it is familiar. In regions shaped by storms, homes are built with shutters and reinforced roofs. In volcanic landscapes, people settle on slopes once carved by lava, planting crops in soil made rich by past eruptions. In floodplains, houses rise on stilts, built high above the ground, to stay clear of the water that inevitably returns. Everywhere, people adapt, not by avoiding danger entirely, but by learning to live alongside it. There is resilience in this coexistence. Families tuck children into bed, knowing the world outside can shift without warning. They prepare emergency kits, store water, secure furniture, not out of fear, but responsibility. Communities organize drills, share knowledge, build networks of support. They do not pretend the earth is safe. They simply choose to live fully, despite the uncertainty. Travel through these regions, and you notice something remarkable. People laugh more loudly, hold each other more firmly, appreciate sunlight a little more deeply. When life is lived beneath a restless sky or on trembling ground, every quiet moment feels earned. Vulnerability becomes a teacher, shaping a deeper awareness of how fragile and precious a home can be. The mystery remains. Why do humans stay in such places? Why build homes where storms roar, where rivers swell, where mountains breathe fire, where the earth grumbles beneath foundations? The answers are as varied as the landscapes. Some stay because it is where their ancestors lived and where their stories are buried. Others stay because the land is beautiful, generous, fertile. Some remain because home is not chosen by safety, but by love. Homes built on moving ground are not signs of recklessness. They are signs of humanity, of our willingness to belong to a world that is wild, unpredictable, and alive. In every creak of a wooden beam, every tremble of soil, every gust of wind, there is a reminder. We are part of this planet, not separate from it. And though it shifts beneath our feet, we continue to build, to hope, to dream. Across the world, in quiet rooms lit by the glow of monitors, people keep watch over a planet that rarely sleeps. They are not heroes celebrated on grand stages, nor are they figures whose names echo through history. They are meteorologists, seismologists, volcanologists, oceanographers, engineers, caretakers of the world's warnings. Their work unfolds not in dramatic bursts, but in long hours of patience, attention, and precision. In a seismic monitoring center, a scientist sits before a screen lined with thin green curves. Each spike tells a story: a tremor miles beneath the ground, a shift along a fault line, a whisper from the Earth's deep muscles. The scientist studies these lines with practiced calm, knowing that patterns are often subtle, almost invisible. Most tremors pose no threat, but some contain signatures, slight, unusual behaviors that hint at deeper movement. The scientist must decide when a tremor is simply the Earth stretching and when it might signal something more. In weather stations perched along coasts, forecasters track satellite images late into the night. They watch clouds gather and swirl, studying the birth of storms thousands of miles away. They track temperature shifts in the ocean, wind speeds at great heights, and the faint signs of rotation that could grow into a cyclone. Each piece of data matters. Each forecast becomes a delicate balance of caution and accuracy. Too early a warning may cause unnecessary panic. Too late, a warning may cost lives. Volcanologists climb steep slopes to measure gas emissions rising from mountain vents. They carry instruments that detect sulfur, carbon dioxide, and the subtle heat that seeps upward from magma chambers. Sometimes they hear the mountains speak, not in words, but in the rumble of moving rock or the hiss of escaping steam. They take notes, compare readings, and listen for changes in the volcano's breath. To study a volcano is to develop a relationship with a sleeping giant, feeling its rhythms, trusting its hints. Oceanographers maintain networks of buoys that float across the sea, measuring waves, pressure, and currents. These devices send quiet signals through satellites, offering early clues of tsunamis traveling across open water. When a buoy detects a sudden shift, a chain of experts springs into action. They verify the reading, contact emergency agencies, and issue alerts that ripple across nations. The people who do this work may never see the coastlines they protect, yet they stand between those shores and the rising sea. Emergency planners study evacuation routes, structural weaknesses, and the lessons of past disasters. They meet with communities, draft protocols, and teach people how to respond when the world shifts beneath them. Their work is often unglamorous: paperwork, meetings, drills, yet it is essential. In their hands, knowledge becomes preparation, and preparation becomes survival. Most of the time, disaster does not strike. Most nights pass quietly. The data flows, the systems hum, and the world spins through another rotation without incident. These caretakers do not complain. They understand that the absence of disaster means their vigilance is working. or simply that the earth has chosen peace for a while. And yet, there are countless disasters that never happened because someone noticed a pattern early, issued a warning, or closed a vulnerable road just in time. These stories rarely make news. There are no headlines for tragedies prevented, no monuments for lives quietly saved. But the caretakers know. They carry the satisfaction of knowing that their watchfulness helps strangers they will never meet, in places they will never see. Their work is a testament to the human desire to protect, to understand, to anticipate. In a world shaped by forces we cannot control, the caretakers of warning stand as a bridge between knowledge and safety. They listen to the planet's shifting moods and interpret its signs, offering humanity precious moments of precaution before the earth remembers its ancient strength. Across the world, the ruins of past disasters lie scattered like pages torn from an ancient book. Some are famous, preserved in museums, photographed by travelers, studied by scholars. Others lie forgotten, reclaimed by forests, swallowed by sand, or buried beneath rebuilt cities. But each ruin, whether known or hidden, holds a lesson engraved, not just in stone, but in the memory of generations that followed. Imagine walking through a broken town long after the disaster that shaped it. Walls stand at odd angles, their edges softened by time. Streets lead nowhere, ending abruptly where buildings once stood. Fragments of pottery lie half buried in soil. A staircase rises into the open air, a reminder of a home that no longer exists. The silence is heavy, as though the land itself is holding its breath, remembering. Disasters do not erase everything. They leave clues, the orientation of collapsed structures, scorch marks on stone, floodlines stained into walls, layers of ash pressed into the soil. Archaeologists learn to read these signs like lines of poetry. A toppled column might reveal the direction of a quake's force. Charcoal deposits may indicate the path of an ancient wildfire. Buried boat remains can show how far inland a tsunami once reached. Each fragment contributes to a larger narrative. What happened, how fast it came, how people tried to escape, how they rebuilt. In volcanic regions, entire towns have been found perfectly preserved beneath layers of ash. Bread still sits in ovens, frozen in time. Tools lie exactly where they dropped. These silent rooms reveal intimate details of daily life, the kind of details history rarely captures. They show how ordinary people lived, worked, and dreamed before the world changed in a single moment. The lesson here is not merely about destruction, but about the tenderness of human routine and how quickly it can be broken. In floodplains, layers of silt tell of seasons when rivers rose higher than any memory recorded. Farmers learned to build homes on stilts, to store grain above ground, to predict the river's mood from the shape of distant clouds. These adaptations, passed down through generations, became part of a culture's identity. The land taught its people, and its people listened. Earthquakes leave their own signatures, shifted foundations, split streets, tilted wells. In some ancient cities, entire neighborhoods were rebuilt with wider streets and reinforced walls after a devastating quake. The builders did not have modern engineering, but they had observation. They understood that a second disaster would come someday, and they tried to prepare. Their choices echo in modern seismic codes, a reminder that wisdom often begins with loss. Coastal ruins tell stories of storms that battered shorelines long before satellites tracked their paths. Old maps show villages that once stood where waves now break. Stone embankments and buried seawalls speak of past attempts to push back the ocean. These structures may be crumbling, but their message is clear. The sea remembers its dominion, and it always returns. Some of the most powerful lessons come from communities that rebuilt not once, but many times. Towns destroyed by fires rose again from ashes. Their streets widened to prevent future spread. Cities struck repeatedly by hurricanes developed their own architecture. Low roofs, sturdy shutters, elevated foundations. Mountain villages learned to avoid avalanche paths, marking them with caution in their stories and songs. These adaptations were rarely documented formally, yet they shaped entire landscapes. Even myths and folklore carry lessons written in metaphor. Stories of angry gods or restless spirits often reflect real environmental events, eruptions, floods, droughts, encoded in language accessible to people who lacked scientific tools. These stories guided behavior, warning communities where not to build, when to flee, how to interpret unusual signs in nature. Beneath the supernatural elements lies practical ancient wisdom. Modern science continues this work, translating the Earth's history into safety measures. Engineers study old ruins to understand how buildings fail. Hydrologists examine sediment layers to predict future floods. Climate scientists look at ice cores and tree rings to learn how past societies endured drought. Each fragment of the past becomes a blueprint for resilience. But perhaps the most profound lesson written in ruins is not about infrastructure or survival. It is about humility. Each collapsed wall reminds us that human plans, no matter how carefully made, exist within the larger movement of the planet. Each buried city reminds us that time outlives memory. And each reconstruction, every rebuilt home, every reopened school, every new generation, reminds us of humanity's quiet, stubborn refusal to surrender. Ruins teach us that life continues, not unchanged, not untouched, but renewed. They show that even after the earth reshapes itself, people find ways to rise again, carrying forward the lessons carved into stone, soil, ash, and story. The day grows quiet as evening settles across the land, softening every edge, dimming every sound. Lamps glow in windows, curtains sway gently in the breeze. Somewhere outside, a dog barks once, then falls silent. The world seems to exhale after the long stretch of daylight, releasing its weight into the cool air. Night comes slowly, carrying with it the familiar hum of crickets, the whisper of trees, the faint pulse of distant traffic. It is in these hours, when the world feels stillest, that we are reminded of how fragile and precious safety truly is. You lie down in your room, surrounded by the objects that make up your daily life. A blanket pulled to your chin, a pillow softened by years of use, the faint scent of laundry soap lingering in the sheets. The quiet feels comforting, like a small shelter carved out of the vastness of the world. Outside your walls lies a planet alive with motion, winds circling continents, tides rising and retreating, magma pushing against rock miles below the surface. Yet inside, you feel held, wrapped in a moment of calm that exists despite everything happening beyond the horizon. The floor beneath your bed rests on a crust that shifts imperceptibly with each passing hour. Fault lines stretch like hidden scars beneath cities and fields, waiting for their turn to move. Mountains grow by grains, lifted by forces that began long before your ancestors spoke their first words. Oceans pulse with currents that could one day rise into towering waves. Storms breathe and swirl across distant seas, gathering strength in darkness. And still you close your eyes, trusting that tonight will be quiet. This trust is not ignorance. It is humanity's way of living alongside a world that is neither gentle nor cruel, simply alive. You sleep because life demands rest, because the body cannot hold tension forever, because the mind requires somewhere soft to retreat. You sleep knowing that the world shifts constantly, and that you cannot command it to be still. You sleep because the alternative is constant fear, and humans are not made to survive in fear. As you drift deeper into drowsiness, your thoughts begin to loosen. You remember stories of distant disasters, earthquakes that reshaped landscapes, storms that tore across coastlines, floods that rewrote the memory of entire towns. You wonder how those people slept the night before their world changed. Did they feel a tremor in their dreams? Did the wind sound different? Or did they fall asleep, just as you do now, wrapped in the softness of blankets and the illusion of certainty? The truth is that no one ever knows when the world will shift. The earth does not keep calendars or clocks. It does not warn us in words. It speaks in subtle changes, a pressure drop, a strange silence, an unusual warmth, signals that rarely translate into clear meaning until after the event has passed. And yet life continues. People build homes, plant gardens, fall in love, raise families, and make plans for futures that stretch beyond the limits of prediction. You breathe slowly, deeply, letting the rhythm settle into your chest. The room around you becomes a cocoon, its shadows comforting rather than ominous. The hum of a refrigerator, the tick of a clock, the distant rumble of a passing car. These sounds root you in the ordinariness of life. They remind you that danger is not the whole story, that disasters, as powerful as they are, exist within a larger world, filled with quiet mornings, gentle rains, blooming trees, and laughter shared between people who care for each other. The same forces that destroy also create. The earthquakes that shake cities also build mountains. The volcanoes that darken skies enrich the soil that later feeds generations. The storms that topple trees scatter seeds far across the land. The floods that erase fields leave behind fertile ground. Even cosmic impacts, dramatic and terrifying, have shaped oceans, climates, and the very distribution of life on Earth. You are part of that same story. Fragile, yes, but also resilient. Your existence is the result of countless worlds ending and beginning again. You are the echo of past catastrophes and the promise that life finds new paths forward. In this way, sleeping on a dangerous planet becomes an act of faith and continuity. It is a statement that life persists, not because the world is safe, but because life adapts, endures, and shines even in the shadow of uncertainty. As your breath slows and your eyelids grow heavy, the world fades into softness. The dangers beyond your walls do not vanish, but they lose their immediacy. The earth continues to shift, winds continue to roam, oceans continue to breathe, and you, for now, are safe in the quiet space between awareness and dreaming. The night wraps around you like a gentle tide, carrying you towards sleep. And in that drifting, fragile moment, suspended between the known and the unknowable, you become part of the ancient rhythm of a restless world, held gently by the same forces that shaped mountains, carved valleys, and lit the stars.